Chapter 84. After washing up, Yu Qianqiu took out a brand new Fuxian Island uniform from his storage bag and put it on. He sat down cross-legged to check the condition of his body. Guan Yu and Qin Feng didn't need to say anything. They consciously stood on his left and right sides to protect him. Although there was no danger here, they seemed to have the awareness of being subordinates. His body's toughness had greatly increased. The width and toughness of the veins in his body were also incomparable. It seemed that after successfully building his foundation, his body, the carrier, had a qualitative leap. The true qi in his dantian had automatically refined into white liquid true qi. It shouldn't be called true qi now, it should be called essence qi. Unfortunately, it was only a small ball, not enough to fill the gap between his dantian's teeth. Essence qi revolved, and his body was immediately filled with power. After a little experience, he realized that the difference between cultivation before and after building his foundation was like heaven and earth. No wonder every cultivator wanted to break through to the foundation building stage. Apart from the increase in cultivation, there was another more important reason, and that was the increase in lifespan. In this era, a normal person could live to 60 or 70 years old. If it was a qi refinement cultivator, it wouldn't be a problem to live to 100 years old. Once he broke through to the foundation building stage, his lifespan would increase by another 50 years. There were 4 stages: foundation building, core formation, nascent soul, and tribulation passing. Each stage was divided into early, middle, and last stages. Each stage meant 50 years of lifespan. If he could cultivate to the last stage of tribulation passing, his lifespan would increase by another 600 years. There was also the legendary soul formation stage. It was said that it was also divided into 3 stages. The first stage would increase his lifespan by 800 years, and the third stage would increase his lifespan by 2,400 years. After breaking through to become a god, his lifespan would be as long as heaven and earth, but this was all a legend. Yu Qianqiu thought about trying to see if there was a chance to live forever, but after thinking about it, he didn't think it was possible, although he had a bit of a dream. On the way back, Yu Qianqiu walked in front while Guan Yu and Qin Feng consciously followed behind. Yu Qianqiu smiled and didn't say anything. It was as if he had found the feeling of being a boss in his previous life. Yunchang, didn't you say that when you reach the foundation building stage you can ride a sword? Did your father or grandfather teach you anything about this? Yu Qianqiu asked. Guan Yu shook his head and said, "No, my grandfather and father have always abided by the sect rules in supporting Immortal Island. They didn't impart anything to me without permission. After my grandfather passed away and my father's whereabouts were unknown, I didn't have the chance to learn from him." His tone was a little gloomy. Qin Feng looked at him in shock. It turned out that Guan Yu was from supporting Immortal Island. This was the first time he found out. Yu Qianqiu nodded his head and thought that there was a reason why Guan Yu was expelled from the supporting Immortal Island. There were many people with low aptitudes in every sect and sect. Who had ever heard of a grandfather who was an elder of a sect but his grandson couldn't even reach the foundation building realm and was expelled from the sect? Could it be that the supporting Immortal Island had given out so many foundation building pills every year? Was it so difficult for a dignified elder to get a few more building foundation done? This was probably related to his father and grandfather's pedantry. "Boss, you're already at the foundation building stage. You can openly go to the scripture depository to learn all kinds of spells. There's no lack of sword kinesis flight spells there." Guan Yu added. Scripture depository? Yu Qianqiu was a little gloomy. He knew that foundation building disciples could enter the scripture depository to learn spells, but didn't he want to hide it? Mulberry Garden's foundation building disciples would naturally be reported by Mulberry Garden to Wanfen Garden. Then it would be passed on to the sect for confirmation before being recorded. Ma Jiugu and the others would inevitably ask after he succeeded in foundation building. How should he answer then? What was the point of not learning some defensive spells after succeeding in foundation building? Presumably, Guan Yu and Qin Feng were also looking forward to it. Yu Qianqiu thought for a while and said with a frown, "I'll think of a way to learn spells." In the collapsed bamboo courtyard, Bai Suzhen was still sitting cross-legged there. Yu Qianqiu didn't disturb her. He had already stayed here for 2 days and staying too long wasn't a good idea. He turned around and looked at the mess he made and said to the two, "I'll leave this place to you. When I come next time I'll ask my sister to return your natal primordial spirits." The two were very excited and said in unison, "Yes." Back in the hut, Furong was no longer on the bed. At this hour she should be working in the spiritual grass field. His eyes suddenly brightened when he glanced at the bed. It was inconvenient for him to go to the scripture depository, but couldn't Furong, who was at the foundation building stage, go? Wouldn't it be the same to ask her to write it down and bring it to me? The most important thing was that this girl was obedient and trustworthy. She was really the best person to do this. It was reasonable to say that with Yen Zixia's cultivation level she could also do it, but because she was from the 100 Flowers Valley she rarely showed up in the mulberry garden. She definitely wouldn't go to a place as ostentatious as the scripture depository. Having made up his mind, he was in a good mood and leisurely walked to the spiritual grass field. There were a few familiar figures, but he didn't see Furong's shadow. Looking around, Yu Qianzhou frowned deeply. At the entrance of the mulberry garden, Furong was limping and carrying a load. She bit her lip and walked over with difficulty step by step. When Yu Qianzhou saw her, his first thought was that this girl was beaten by someone. It seemed that both her legs were injured. Otherwise, with her cultivation level at the late stage of foundation building, even if she could walk with one leg, carrying a load wouldn't be so difficult. Who was so wicked? Knowing that she had to carry a load and work every day, he actually hurt her legs. An indescribable anger ignited in Yu Qianzhou's chest. This girl was very timid. She never went to provoke people and she never dared to provoke people. Who had such a big grudge against her that they actually wanted to mess with her like this? Yu Qianzhou took a deep breath and swallowed his anger. He hurriedly ran over and said, "Martial Uncle Furong, quickly give me the load." Who would have thought that when Furong saw him, it was as if she had seen a ghost. She was so scared that she retreated again and again. Unable to bear it, both of her legs were injured. She lost her balance and the load on her small shoulders fell down. The feces in the 2 buckets spilled all over the ground. She also fell on her butt and was covered in dirt. Yu Qianzhou was stunned. Then, ignoring the dirt on the ground, he walked over to help her up. With a heavy expression, he asked, "What happened to your leg?" Furong, who was helped up, pushed him away and said fearfully, "It's nothing. I accidentally fell when I was walking." Their movements immediately attracted other people's attention. Quite a few female disciples who were squatting in the spiritual herb field and working stood up and looked in their direction. Someone with a cultivation level in the late stage of the foundation building realm could fall while walking, and even injure both of her legs like this? Even a ghost wouldn't believe that. Yu Qianzhou snorted coldly and said, "Who did it?" Furong begged, "I beg you, don't worry about me. I beg you, hurry up and leave." Seeing that she didn't answer, Yu Qianzhou immediately disregarded everything and forcibly carried her to the side. He lifted up her long skirt to examine the injuries on her legs. Furong struggled with all her might. This caused quite a few female disciples in the spiritual herb field to cry out in alarm. The result of his examination was that the bones in the same position on both legs were broken, and both legs were very swollen. Fortunately, Furong was a cultivator with a certain level of cultivation. If it was a normal person, let alone working, they wouldn't even be able to walk. Yu Qianzhou let go of her and angrily said, "Why didn't you apply medicine? Why didn't you treat your injuries? Both your legs were broken, so why did you still run out to work? Who in the world did it?" Furong stared behind him and shook her head repeatedly in fright. Yu Qianzhou turned his head to look behind him. Elder Lon expressionlessly walked over. Elder Lon swept a glance at the feces scattered all over the ground, then stared at Furong and said coldly, "What's going on here?" Furong was so scared that she was trembling. Yu Qianzhou knew she was most afraid of Elder Lon, so he immediately explained, "Disciple accidentally bumped into Martial Uncle, that's why I ended up like this. Elder Lon, please punish me." Chapter 85. Lon Bingshu was still staring at Furong and said coldly, "Really?" Furong looked panicked and didn't know what to do. Yu Qianzhou rushed to answer, "Yes, many of the disciples in the garden saw what happened just now. I hope Elder Lon won't blame Martial Uncle. I'll clean this place up later." Lon Bingshu looked at Yu Qianzhou and her cold expression softened a lot. She didn't say anything and turned around to walk into the inner garden. "Wait, Lon Bingshu. I have a favor to ask." Yu Qianzhou shouted. "What is it?" Lon Bingshu turned around and asked. Yu Qianzhou bowed and said, "Junior Master Furong's legs are injured. Both of her thighs are broken. I want some medicine. He knew that Lan Bingxue was the housekeeper of the garden. She was the most suitable person to ask. However, she shook her head and said, "We don't have such medicine." "But how is that possible?" Yu Qianchou was startled. He let out a breath and said, "Then this disciple will go ask Jiugu for a consecration. Maybe she has it." Lan Bingxue reached out a hand and blocked his way. She said slowly, "I told you that we don't have this kind of medicine in Mulberry Garden. Don't tell me you don't believe me?" A stream of cold air floated out of her hand. So cold. Yu Qianchou didn't know what kind of martial arts this woman practiced. He couldn't help but shiver. He suspected that she was the one who broke Furong's legs. Otherwise, why would she be so cruel? No matter how low her cultivation was, they were still disciples of the same school. It was just a guess. He didn't have any evidence and Furong wouldn't say anything. It was not good to offend someone of this level. He took a step away from the freezing cold and politely bowed. "Thank you for your guidance, Elder Lan. This disciple understands." Lan Bingxue glanced at the two of them and went back to the inner garden. "Let's go. I will take you to a place to heal." Yu Qianchou gritted his teeth and said to Furong. There were not many people he was familiar with and could help him in the 10,000 fragrance garden. He thought of Elder Ferdinand, who was in charge of the 10,000 fragrance garden. Furong shook her head and begged, "Please don't care about me, okay? Just move to the inner garden." At this point she bit her lip and stopped as if she had said something she shouldn't. Yu Qianchou said cautiously, "What does this have to do with me moving to the inner garden? Could it be that your leg was injured because I refused to move to the inner garden?" Furong frantically waved her hands and said, No, it really isn't." Her abnormal behavior aroused Yu Qianchou's suspicion even more, reminding him of a certain matter. Some time ago Xianxia had asked him several times to move into the inner garden, but he had always refused. He knew that Xianxia liked him and had asked him to live in the inner garden so that they could meet at any time. However, because he was worried that it would be inconvenient to live in the inner garden, and he was afraid that others would discover his secret, and Furong's mouth was very reliable. She could keep the secret that he often disappeared for no reason, so he rejected Xianxia and would rather live with Furong in a small nest. Could it be that because he and Furong refused to separate from each other, it aroused Xianxia's jealousy and caused trouble for Furong? This woman was a very jealous animal. The more Yu Qianchou thought about it, the more he felt it was possible. He probed, "Your leg was injured by Xianxia?" Furong really didn't want to stand here and be entangled with him endlessly. She cried, "No." After saying this, she endured the pain in her leg and went to pick up the overturned bucket. "Did you ruin your face and now you want to cripple your legs?" Yu Qianchou shouted. He kicked away the bucket she wanted to pick up, picked her up by the waist and ran outside. Furong kept struggling and even used her fists. However, perhaps she was really too kind and didn't seem to know how to refuse others or how to hit people. The strength of her fists hitting Yu Qianchou's body was directly ignored by him. Yu Qianchou shook his head and smiled bitterly at the thought of wasting his late-stage foundation establishment realm cultivation. He didn't think he was a good person and he didn't have the obligation to save the dying and help the injured. However, as a man, there were some things he should do and some things he shouldn't, not to mention that she might have been implicated by him. He would just treat it as doing a good deed and helping the weak. A man carrying a woman running in broad daylight had never appeared in Wanfen Garden before, so it attracted a lot of people's attention. As soon as they ran to the entrance of Wanfen Garden's main hall, they were naturally stopped by the guards. "Let go of me." Furong was still struggling and Yu Qianchou also became a little angry. With a paw sound he slapped Furong's wriggling butt. The person on his shoulder immediately quieted down, and the two female disciples guarding the entrance were also a little dumbfounded. Yu Qianchou said while carrying Furong, "Disciple Yu Qianchou is here to see Elder Fei." The female guard saw the two of them rushing in with dirty clothes. She originally wanted to question them, but at this time she was also stunned and said, "Wait." She went in to report. Not long after she came out and told him that Elder Fei let him in. After carrying Furong in, he saw Ferdinand standing in the main hall of the main hall. "Yu Qianchou, what are you doing?" Ferdinand saw him carrying a person and asked curiously. Because of what happened in the past, Yu Qianchou didn't have a good impression of him, so he didn't bother to be polite with him. He put Furong down and helped her to sit on a chair. Then he saluted and said, I don't know who broke Martial Aunt Furong's leg. Please treat her injury, Elder Fei. However, he saw him staring at Furong in a daze. The latter was timid and didn't dare to raise her head under his gaze. Yu Qianchou looked at both sides. Could it be that Ferdinand had a special hobby of liking ugly girls? No wonder Lan Bingxue was so beautiful but lived apart from him for a long time. Thinking about it made him shudder. He hurriedly saluted again and said, Please treat Martial Aunt Furong's injury, Elder Fei. Ferdinand came back to his senses and said anxiously, Furong is injured? Where is the injury? Both of her thigh bones were broken. What? Ferdinand screamed and took a few steps forward. Just as he was about to reach out and lift up the long skirt covering Furong's legs, the latter subconsciously covered it with her hands. Ferdinand's hand paused. Then he remembered that the other party was a woman and it was a bit indecent to do so. He squatted down on the ground and put his hands directly on Furong's knees. He transferred his qi from his palms into the other party's leg to check the injury. After a while, Ferdinand's face became livid. He slowly stood up and suddenly slammed his palm on the tea table. Bang! The tea table was smashed into pieces. Furong was so scared that she shrank in the chair. Ferdinand's eyes were red and his chest was heaving. He stared at Yu Qianchou and shouted, Who did it? Damn it! Why are you getting angry at me? I didn't do it. Yu Qianchou smiled bitterly and said, I don't know either. Ferdinand stared at Furong again and his expression became very kind. He said, Tell me who did it. Furong stammered, No, I fell myself. Her words could not deceive Yu Qianchou, nor could it deceive Ferdinand. The latter gritted his teeth and said, Was it Lan Bingxue who did it? Furong shook her head in fear. Yu Qianchou was very surprised. Looking at Ferdinand's expression, it was clear that Elder Lan was the one who did it. What was even more strange was why he was so concerned about Furong. Elder Ferdinand, she is timid. Why don't you heal her first? If you have any questions, ask later, Yu Qianchou said. Unexpectedly, Ferdinand pointed at him and scolded, I don't need you to be a good person. Why did I bring you to the mulberry garden? I just wanted you to take care of her. How come you don't know who did it when she was injured like this? Trash. Yu Qianchou pointed at himself. He opened his mouth and was speechless. His mind was in a mess. Chapter 86. Humph. Fernand took out a piece of jade from his storage pouch, made a few finger seals and said to the jade, Junior Martial Sister Chiu, I'm Fernand, please come here quickly. Finished speaking, he crushed it in his hand. Then he took out a jade stone and cast the same spell. He shouted, Lan Bingxue, come here. He crushed the jade stone. After doing this, Ferdinand angrily paced back and forth in the lobby. Yu Qianchou also came to his senses. He finally understood why Ferdinand wanted him to grow spirit herbs in the mulberry garden. It was to take care of Hibiscus. Who was this ugly girl? He looked at Hibiscus, who was in a panic speechlessly. She was probably afraid when she heard that Elder Lan was coming. Not long after, a disciple's voice came from outside the hall. Elder Chiu. A graceful woman led a delicate and pretty young girl in. Yu Qianchou had seen this woman before and knew that she was Elder Chiu, who was in charge of healing supporting Immortal Island's disciples. However, he had never seen the young girl behind her. Yu Qianchou bowed. Disciple Yu Qianchou greets Elder Chiu. Hibiscus also wanted to stand up and bow, but Elder Fei pressed her shoulder. You shouldn't stand. Elder Chiu won't blame you. She then turned her head and said, Junior sister, come and take a look at her. Her leg bones are broken and there should be some other injuries. I can't do it. You are an expert, so I had to invite you. Elder Chiu nodded. Senior brother, you don't have to be so polite with me. He walked to Hibiscus and was slightly startled when he saw her face. He asked Ferdinand, Is it Hibiscus? The latter nodded sadly. Damn. Who is this girl? How could a big shot know her? Yu Qianchou had to re-examine this ugly girl. Elder Jiugu, Elder Lan. The disciple's voice came from outside. Lan Bingxue, who was sneering, walked in with Ma Jiugu. Elder Jiugu. Ferdinand and Elder Chiu bowed. Consecrated Jiugu, Elder Lan. Yu Qianchou and the pretty girl greeted. Hibiscus, who was about to bow, was once again pressed down on her shoulder by Ferdinand. Lan Bingxue sneered, "Ferdinand, why did you call me here?" Ferdinand's face was full of anger. He pointed at Hibiscus and shouted at her, "Did you break her legs?" Lan Bingxue glanced at Hibiscus and said, "Did she tell you herself?" "I'm asking you, did you interrupt?" Ferdinand shouted again. "So what if I am? Do you feel sorry for her?" Lan Bingxue scornfully said, "I should have killed her and that little bitch together." All right. What did you promise me back then?" Ferdinand's chest heaved up and down rapidly. He said angrily, "You promised Jiugu and me that you wouldn't hurt her as long as I don't see her again. I've always kept my promise. What did you do?" There's definitely an affair." Yu Qianzhou looked at Ferdinand and then at Lan Bingxue. Ma Jiugu heavily poked the hall with her walking stick. Suddenly the hall became silent. Only Ferdinand's rapid breathing could be heard. She walked to Hibiscus with her walking stick and casually touched Hibiscus's legs. Her half-drooping eyelids suddenly opened. She stared at Lan Bingxue and said in a deep voice, "Lan girl, what's going on?" Lan Bingxue's face flashed with a trace of panic. She hurriedly walked over, made a finger gesture and whispered in Ma Jiugu's ear. She pointed at Yu Qianzhou from time to time. Yu Qianzhou knew that she was using a kind of sound transmission spell. No one could hear it except for the designated person. But why did she keep pointing at him? He was depressed. Now everyone was staring at him and Ferdinand was staring at him with bloodshot eyes as if he was going to eat him. After listening to Lan Bingxue's explanation, Ma Jiugu's eyelids returned to normal. She shook her head and said, "Lan girl, I have my own plan. Why do I need you to intervene? Since you have broken the original promise, Ferdinand has the right to reunite with his daughter. Don't have any ideas about her in the future. Otherwise I won't spare you." "Daughter? Is she talking about Hibiscus?" Yu Qianzhou had a rough idea of what was going on. He guessed that Furong was the daughter of Ferdinand after he had an affair with a woman. In the end his wife found out and killed his lover. After that the two of them made an agreement and Lan Bingxue took his daughter away. But what does this have to do with me? Why is Samba pointing at me? The anger on Ferdinand's face instantly turned into surprise. It seemed that he couldn't believe it was true. Lan Bingxue's face changed color. He stared at Hibiscus while trembling all over. A faint white mist was emitted from her body. The temperature of the whole hall immediately dropped. "What? Lan girl, don't you agree?" Ma Jiugu poked Lan Bingxue with her walking stick. Lan Bingxue shook her head and said, "I don't dare." Her eyes were full of resentment as she stared at Yu Qianzhou. Yu Qianzhou was alarmed. He knew that it was him who ruined her plan. Now he had accidentally made another strong enemy. Well, Hibiscus doesn't need to return to Mulberry Garden anymore. Ferdinand doesn't need to pursue the matter of Lan girl hurting others. From today onwards, the two of you will treat it as if it never happened. Don't make trouble anymore. Ma Jiugu turned her head and said, "Ferdinand, you are in charge of Wanfen Garden. Can you agree if I make the decision?" Ferdinand was pleasantly surprised and said, "Everything is up to Jiugu." Ferdinand thanks Jiugu. He was naturally happy to get his daughter back. Hibiscus was timid but she was not stupid. At this time her eyes were filled with tears and she bit her lips. Yu Qianzhou was thinking about how to get along with Lan Bingxue in the future. Suddenly Ma Jiugu's voice came to his ears. "Yu Qianzhou, I heard that you refined a lot of foundation building pills. You must have succeeded in building your foundation, right?" Yu Qianzhou's face sank. He looked at her and heard her say, "Don't worry about others hearing me. I used divine sense to transmit my voice. Only you can hear it. Don't worry about others." It seemed that what he said to Xianxia didn't work. She still told Ma Jiu about it. This woman. A trace of disgust flashed in his heart. Yu Qianzhou nodded unhappily and admitted that he had succeeded in building his foundation. Ma Jiugu said to him, "Then this old woman congratulates you. If someone asks about you in the future, you can tell them that this old woman gave you foundation building pills." Yu Qianzhou nodded again. He knew that this was a gesture of goodwill and helped him avoid a lot of trouble. It was reasonable to say that this was what he wanted, so he should be happy. But when he thought that it was his woman who leaked the secret, he couldn't be happy. "Danan, Yu Qianzhou has succeeded in building his foundation. Tell him." Ma Jiugu suddenly said. "What? He succeeded in building his foundation?" I got it. Fernand was a bit surprised. But since Ma Jiugu said so, it shouldn't be a lie. Moreover, he knew what he should not ask. In the hall, apart from Elder Chiu the young girl and Furong Lan Bingxue also looked at Yu Qianchou with a bit of surprise. She didn't know when he succeeded in building his foundation. She was doing a good deed to the end, helping the Buddha to the west. Why did she do me such a big favor? Yu Qianchou sighed. He was a bit creeped out thinking that a person with such a high cultivation was scheming against him. Your daughter has returned to your side. What are you going to do with Yu Qianchou? Ma Jiugu asked. Ferdinand muttered. I borrowed him from Elder Guan. I promised to return him to him. If Ninth Aunt has any use for him, of course he will continue to stay in the mulberry garden. I don't think Elder Guan will have any objection. Ma Jiugu shook her head and said, Isn't that forcing him? I think Yu Qianchou should make the decision himself. If he wants to go back to Alchemy Pavilion, he can go back. If he wants to stay in Mulberry Garden, I will talk to Wei Wu and ask him to give this disciple to Mulberry Garden. Elder Chiu and the young girl looked at Yu Qianchou together. They didn't know why Ma Jiugu thought so highly of him. Just do as Jiugu said. Fernand nodded and said to Yu Qianchou, Yu Qianchou, do you want to stay in Mulberry Garden or go back to Alchemy Pavilion? Yu Qianchou finally understood the reason why Ma Jiugu showed goodwill to him. It turned out that she wanted him to stay in Mulberry Garden. What was on him that she wanted? After a moment of silence, he slowly said, A master for a day is a master for life. I want to go back to master. Chapter 87. Ma Jiugu slowly closed her eyes. Everyone could understand the meaning behind her words. She said this because she wanted Yu Qianchou to stay, but the latter didn't give her any face. Everyone was shocked. The girl who came with Elder Chiu couldn't help but look at Yu Qianchou. Ferdinand's expression changed. He said in a low voice, Yu Qianchou, do you want to reconsider? It's your good fortune to have Jiugu ask. Under everyone's gazes, Yu Qianchou remained silent. There was no need to say anything, and this already represented his attitude. Lan Bingxue shouted, Yu Qianchou, do you really think you are somebody? Don't be so ungrateful. Yu Qianchou shook his head. I, Yu Qianchou, am not somebody, but if master doesn't give up, I won't dare to turn my back on him. Everyone was moved by his words. The young girl by Elder Chiu's side looked at him with an even brighter gaze. You. Lan Bingxue said angrily, you're courting death. She took a step forward and was about to attack. Lan girl. Ma Jiugu waved her hand to stop her. She opened her eyes to look at Yu Qianchou and said, Wei Wu has been muddle-headed all day long. I didn't expect that he would be so lucky to have accepted a good disciple. Speaking of which, he is my grandnephew. I should be happy for him. Most of the people in the cultivation world were people who wouldn't get up early if there were no benefits. If an expert like Ma Jiugu were to take a liking to someone like Ma Jiugu, then they would be extremely happy. Not to mention how many benefits they could get, just the fact that an expert at the late stage of the crossing tribulation stage was standing behind them meant that no matter how strong the cultivation world was, they would have to think twice before making a move on him. Therefore Ma Jiugu's words of praise were indeed sincere. Thank you, Elder Jiugu. Yu Qianchou said respectfully. In fact, he didn't think so much and he wasn't as great as he said. He was just a little disappointed in Xianxia, so disappointed that he didn't want to go back to the mulberry garden. He could let anyone else down, but he couldn't accept the betrayal of his own people. Before this, he was confident that Xianxia could become his woman. Ma Jiugu nodded and said to Lan Bingxue, let's go back. When passing by Yu Qianchou, she said to him, don't forget that you still owe me a favor. Yu Qianchou bowed. This disciple dares not forget. That's good, Ma Jiugu said and left the hall with Lan Bingxue. Before he left, he cast a cold glance at Yu Qianchou. As soon as they left, everyone's attention in the main hall shifted to Furong, but they saw that she was silent and crying non-stop. Ferdinand's eyes were red as he heaved a long sigh and said to Elder Chiu, please, junior sister. Because she was a woman, it was inconvenient for her to recuperate in the main hall, so Ferdinand ordered someone to clean up a room. Seeing that the people who helped her into the room were all strangers, Furong couldn't help but panic. She suddenly turned around and shouted into the main hall, Yu Qianchou. She didn't speak, but this naturally attracted everyone's attention, especially the person she called. Yu Qianchou was stunned. This was the first time Furong called him. He scratched his head and said, Senior sister, what's the matter? He was used to calling her martial uncle, so he almost couldn't change it. He remembered that he was also a foundation-building cultivator, so he should call her senior sister. Furong was also not used to it, so she said awkwardly, Are you leaving? I'm going back to Alchemy Pavilion to see my master. With Elder Fei taking care of you, senior sister, you can recuperate in peace. Yu Qianzhou realized. Furong gritted her teeth and said, Will you come back? This ugly girl was very timid. She was probably a little afraid of being alone here. Yu Qianzhou comforted, Senior sister, don't worry. I'll definitely come to see you often when I'm free. Ferdinand looked at the two thoughtfully. Seeing that Furong didn't speak, he ordered someone to help her in. There were only 2 men left in the main hall, and it was not convenient for them to follow in. Yu Qianzhou, when do you want to return to Alchemy Pavilion? Ferdinand asked, his eyes looking up and down. Yu Qianzhou scratched his head and said, I have to go back sooner or later. It's better to go back early than late. I'll go back now. Ferdinand nodded and said, I'll send you back. Yu Qianzhou hurriedly waved his hand and said, No need, no need. How can I trouble Elder? Disciple knows the way back. It has nothing to do with you. I borrowed people from Alchemy Pavilion. I have to give Elder Guan an explanation. Ferdinand said. But senior sister Furong. Ferdinand waved his hand and said, She won't recover for a while. It's enough for her to go back and forth to Alchemy Pavilion. After that, he summoned another disciple and told him to listen to Elder Qiu's arrangement. The 2 of them left the main hall. Yu Qianzhou thought that he was going to grab him and fly away again. Who knew that Ferdinand would walk, so he had to follow. Along the way, Ferdinand constantly looked at Yu Qianzhou with strange eyes. The latter didn't know what he was doing, so he simply pretended not to see it. Otherwise, he would panic in his heart. Not long after, Ferdinand finally asked, I heard that you've been sleeping in the same room with Furong in the mulberry garden? Yu Qianzhou was stunned and hurriedly explained, No, we were in the same room but not on the same bed. Elder Fei, don't misunderstand. Ferdinand nodded non-committally and sighed. Furong's mother died early and I didn't fulfill my responsibility as a father. I'm sorry for her. Yu Qianzhou, can I ask you something? I'm tired of listening to this. Damn it. It's none of my business that you didn't fulfill your responsibility as a father. Yu Qianzhou thought so in his heart, but he respectfully said, Elder Fei, you must be joking. As long as this disciple can do it, I won't hesitate. I can see that she is close to you. After you go back to the Alchemy Pavilion, I hope that you can come and see her often when you have time. Ferdinand, the dignified Wanfen Garden's chief elder, looked at him with a pleading look. This is no problem, I'm afraid. Yu Qianzhou frowned and said, I'm afraid that after I go back I won't be able to control myself. I don't know if I will have time. You don't have to worry about this. I will find Guan Weiwu to arrange a good position for you. If he dares to disagree, the spirit herbs of Wanfen Garden are not so easy to get. Speaking of this, Ferdinand's eyes actually showed a trace of fierce light. As if whoever dared to block his daughter's happiness, he would bite that person to death. Love for a child. Yu Qianzhou smiled. He wanted to ask about Furong's life experience and what was the matter with the injury on her face, but after thinking about it, it was better not to ask. The distance from Wanfen Garden to the Alchemy Pavilion was not far, but it was not close either. It would take a lot of time to walk dozens of miles. In the end, Ferdinand, who was used to flying, could not stand it anymore. He grabbed Yu Qianzhou and flew away, landing on the top of the Alchemy Pavilion in a few moments. Unfortunately, Yu Qianzhou saw his old enemy Yan Shu at a glance. He was puzzled. What was this guy doing here all day long? Why did he bump into him as soon as he arrived? What bad luck. When enemies met, they looked at each other coldly. After the 2 of them met face to face, Yan Shu saluted Ferdinand and said, Elder Fei. Yan family's boy, where's Guan Weiwu? Ferdinand asked. Yan Shu replied, Elder Guan is inside. Oh, I have something to discuss with him. Ferdinand strode into the Alchemy Pavilion and shouted, Guan Weiwu, where are you hiding? Chapter 88. The remaining 2 did not speak. Yan Shu stared coldly at Yu Qianzhou and scrupulously, while the latter looked around and pretended not to see him. After waiting for a while and not seeing Ferdinand come out, Yan Shu's face became uglier and uglier. The other party clearly did not put him in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Yan Shu finally could not hold it in and asked with a gloomy face. Yu Qianzhou looked around and pointed to himself and asked curiously, "Are you talking to me?" This made Yan Shu so angry that his face was distorted and he said sternly, "Do the rules of Fuxian Island allow you to talk to your senior like this?" Yu Qianzhou seemed to have come to his senses and bowed solemnly. "Disciple Yu Qianzhou greets Uncle Master." "Uncle Master?" Yan Shu did not know that he had successfully built his foundation and was now in the foundation building stage. In addition, Yu Qianzhou's situation was special, so it was difficult for outsiders to see the depth of his cultivation. Instead, they thought that he deliberately called him a generation lower. Yan Shu's hatred for Yu Qianzhou was not ordinary. As the saying goes, if you hit someone, don't hit his face. Yu Qianzhou had reprimanded him in front of everyone in the Alchemy Pavilion, causing him to lose face in the Alchemy Pavilion. Until now, there were still disciples who mocked him behind his back. If he did not find a reason to take revenge, how could he swallow it? For a moment he could not find any other reason, so he could only use it as a pretext and shouted angrily, "How dare you? You have no respect for your elders. Do you still have Fuxian Island's rules in your eyes?" Yu Qianzhou sneered, "Strange. Why don't I have Fuxian Island's rules in my eyes? Uncle Master Yan, tell me. What's going on?" It was Guan Weiwu's voice. He and Ferdinand walked out of the Alchemy Pavilion's hall together. "Master." Yu Qianzhou bowed and looked at Guan Weiwu affectionately. Now was the time to argue and he needed his master's support. Guan Weiwu also looked at Yu Qianzhou affectionately and said with a smile, "It's good that you're back. I heard you succeeded in building your foundation. Congratulations." Just now, Ferdinand had already told him about Yu Qianzhou's success in building his foundation, as well as how Yu Qianzhou rejected Majiogu and how Majiogu praised him for having a good disciple. This pill addict was deeply moved and repeatedly said that he did not accept this disciple in vain. At this moment, no matter how she looked at Yu Qianzhou, she found him pleasing to the eye. Yu Qianzhou bowed and said, "Without master's teachings, without consecrator Jiogu's nurturing, I wouldn't be who I am today." Guan Weiwu smiled awkwardly. He couldn't remember when he had taught this disciple, but when the disciple said this, the master also felt proud. In order to cover up the embarrassment, he turned to Yan Shu and said with a serious face, "I heard you shouting in the hall just now. What's going on?" Yan Shu originally wanted to exaggerate the small problem. He also knew that he couldn't do anything to Yu Qianzhou. He just wanted to disgust Yu Qianzhou. When he heard Guan Weiwu say that Yu Qianzhou had succeeded in building his foundation, he really couldn't find fault with him calling him Uncle Master. While he was in a daze, he heard the question and came back to his senses. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's nothing." Guan Weiwu wasn't a meticulous person. When he heard that it was nothing, he couldn't be bothered to ask more. He pointed at Yu Qianzhou and said, "Yan Shu, in the future, Yu Qianzhou will only be responsible for collecting spiritual herbs from Wanfen Garden. You don't need to arrange anything else. Also," after he pondered for a while, he added, "Yu Qianzhou can enter the main hall to find me at any time. No one is to stop him." It was unknown whether this was a great love for his disciple. Once a disciple of supporting Immortal Island reached the foundation building stage, they would have a fixed position. However, the division of labor was different. After all, there were still people to do the sex matters. However, it was much better than having people to look after qi refining disciples. Moreover, Yu Qianzhou's position could be said to be quite easy. Every day he only needed to spend some time to go to Wanfen Garden to collect the spiritual herbs that the Alchemy Pavilion needed. Yan Shu replied with difficulty, "Yes." Yu Qianzhou guessed that it was also a good job. He glanced at Ferdinand. He reckoned that it was fought for by him. The reason was naturally to let him go to Wanfen Garden more often. After some things were explained clearly, Ferdinand's heart was filled with his daughter's injury and didn't stay for long. Guan Weiwu also went to do his own things. Yan Shu could be considered as the housekeeper of the Alchemy Pavilion, so the task of assigning Yu Qianzhou a place to stay fell on his shoulders. His desire for revenge was obvious, so Yu Qianzhou was thrown into the small, secluded courtyard that he had stayed in when he first arrived. It was reasonable to say that a disciple in the foundation building stage had the right to live in a place with better conditions. For Yu Qianzhou there was no need to pick a residence. Moreover, the conditions here were much better than in the mulberry garden. He was also too lazy to make trouble with Yan Shu over such a small matter. The green mountains did not change and the clear water would always flow. There would always be a time for revenge. There was no need to be calculative. The small courtyard was still the same. There was no change. He just didn't know if the people in the courtyard were still the same. Looking at the sky, all the disciples should have returned. He stood in the garden and deliberately coughed twice. Sure enough, hearing the movement in the courtyard, 3 doors opened. Looking at the 3 familiar faces in front of him who were a little surprised, Yu Qianzhou smiled slightly and said, 3 brothers, long time no see. I'm back. Ling Feng, Beizi and Xian Ping looked at each other and showed a trace of embarrassment. In the beginning the 3 of them thought that Yu Qianzhou was a braggart. They couldn't stand him and satirized him. Later they saw him scold Yan Shu in public and did things that the 3 of them didn't dare to do. They knew that they had misunderstood him. After that, the 3 of them regretted it. Unfortunately, they didn't even have a chance to apologize. Yu Qianzhou smiled and said, "Why? Don't you recognize me?" Ling Feng smiled bitterly and said, "How can we not recognize you? It's just that the 3 of us misunderstood Brother Yu that day. We are really ashamed." After one of them spoke, the other 2 also came over to apologize. Especially the silent Xian Ping. He was the one who said the worst things that day. Now he said a bunch of apologies. There was no need for Yu Qianzhou to care about the past. The 4 of them called each other brothers. Without wine to liven things up, they naturally wouldn't be happy. Unfortunately, Xian Ping didn't have his personal stash. After all, their activity was limited, so it wasn't easy to get some wine. However, Yu Qianzhou took out 2 big jars from his storage bag. The 4 of them sat around the stone table and drank to their heart's content. After a few bowls of wine, Yu Qianzhou checked their cultivation. He found that they were still qi refining level 10. He asked curiously, "Could it be that you guys didn't get any foundation building pills this time?" The 3 of them smiled bitterly and complained. They got the foundation building pills, but probably because their talent was too poor, none of them actually succeeded. What was even more tragic was that this was the 2nd time they failed. If they failed again 3 years later, they would probably have to say goodbye to Fuxian Island forever. From then on, they would have to cut off their dreams of cultivation and return to the mortal world. Seeing the 3 of them swallow the bitterness in their mouths, Yu Qianzhou knew that the 3 of them had tried to build their foundation twice. As for whether they could succeed the 3rd time or not, they probably already knew. When he succeeded in building his foundation, he took 12 foundation building pills in a row. He was well aware of how much his body would change after taking 1 foundation building pill. Looking at the 3 of them dispirited, Yu Qianzhou had the urge to take out the foundation building pills to help them for free. He had plenty of foundation building pills anyway. However, he restrained himself. What good would it do him to help them now? Maybe in 3 years, when the 3 of them have their last hope shattered, he could help them without hesitation. At least now was not the time to help them. Their friendship over a glass of wine was very shallow. They hadn't known each other for a long time, so they still needed to understand each other better. In his previous life there was a saying, "There is no free lunch in this world." Yu Qianzhou deeply agreed with it. In life, one must give something in order to get something in return. He helped the 3 of them succeed in building their foundation. How are the 3 of them going to repay him? Let's not talk about us. How did Brother Yu do in building his foundation this time? Ling Feng asked, but in his heart he was already sure that Yu Qianzhou's result was about the same as the 3 of them. Otherwise he wouldn't have come back to this small courtyard. Beizi and Xian Ping also had the same thought. Chapter 89. Yu Qianzhou could more or less guess what they were thinking. He downed a bowl of wine and placed it on the table lightly. He said indifferently, "My luck was better than yours. I succeeded in building my foundation." The 3 of them froze. After a while, Ling Feng asked in disbelief, "Brother Yu, did you say you succeeded in building your foundation?" "I was just lucky." Yu Qianzhou nodded. Beizi put down the wine bowl in her hand and looked at him again. She couldn't see any difference from before. She couldn't help but ask, "You're already in the foundation building stage. Why are you living here?" The three of them looked at him and waited for him to explain. Of course it has something to do with Yanshu. Yu Qianchou smiled. Actually, there's nothing wrong with living here. I have to thank Yanshu for letting me reunite with my three brothers. After their doubts were cleared, the three of them looked at each other and stood up. They bowed together. Martial Uncle Yu. Yu Qianchou put on a shocked expression. He waited for the three of them to bow before standing up and stopping them. What are the three of you doing? Ling Feng shook his head and smiled bitterly. This is the sect's rule. Sigh. Since that's the case, we'll follow the rules in front of others. Let's call each other brothers when we're together. Yu Qianchou pretended to sigh. Since he said that, the other three also nodded in agreement. It wasn't that Yu Qianchou was greedy for this little bit of glory. It was because his mentality had changed greatly after building his foundation. He had to walk step by step. Going to Ongquangceng to fetch Chu Ping'er was his goal. At least it was his current goal. The cultivation world was different from other places. Everything depended on one's strength. In the past, working hard to build his foundation was the first step. After building his foundation, he had to work hard for the second step, which was to increase his strength. He had to be strong enough to go to Ongquangceng to fetch Chu Ping. But how long would it take for a person to have the strength to receive Chu Ping'er? What level of cultivation did one have to reach? The scene of the battle between the Phantom Palace and Ongquangceng in the Spirit Stone Mine was still vivid in their minds. At that time, they were amazed by the strength of the Phantom Palace. But then Ongquangceng showed his strength and destroyed the Phantom Palace in one fell swoop. How terrifying was that strength? Wanting to rely on his own strength to pick up Chu Ping'er was tantamount to a fool's talk. He was afraid that before he could break into Ongquangceng, his bones would not be left. Unless his cultivation could really reach the legendary deity stage, was that even possible? There was one more thing: the death of Master Hao Sansi. It was a pain that was deeply hidden in his heart. There was a grudge that could not be avenged. Who could understand this hatred? Who should he complain to? He had sworn that he would annihilate the exalted Immortal sect. It was not a joke, it was the biggest motivation that spurred him forward. But the exalted Immortal sect was much stronger than Ongquangceng. How could he deal with this kind of strength with a little bit of cleverness? In addition to improving his own cultivation, he had to build a group of forces that belonged to him, a group that could compete with the strength of a sect. This was not a daydream. It was the conclusion that Yu Qianchou came to after careful consideration. The golden bead in his hand was the lever that could pry open all of this. Guan Yu, Qin Feng, and Shi Shaotian were the first batch of forces that belonged to him. Although they were still very immature, he believed that they would mature one day. This matter could not be rushed, and it could not be accomplished overnight. Then Ling Feng, Beizi, Xianping, and everyone else in the cultivation world like you, I can give you the hope you need, but you must also pay for my hope. Yu Qianchou pretended to accept their salute unintentionally so that the three of them would first have the awareness that he was a level higher than them. This was the awareness of subordinates, and it was also the awareness that a leader must have. The awareness that a leader was a level higher than the one being led. The cultivation pavilion was the most valiant place in Fuxian Island. Its territory alone occupied half of the island's area. There were many experts in it, and it was well known in the cultivation world. It was the foundation of Fuxian Islands standing in the cultivation world. Just the number of tribulation-passing elders had always been maintained at more than 80, and there were also countless other experts. For thousands of years, whenever the cultivation world was in chaos or Fuxian Island faced a crisis, the cultivation pavilion would strike like a thunderbolt and turn the tide. It had always maintained the reputation of Fuxian Island as the #1 righteous sect. Not to mention its other achievements, just talking about the last war between the righteous and the devil 400 years ago. Although the supporting Immortal Island was the #1 righteous sect, it was also isolated from the rest of the world. It would not easily get involved in any battles. However, the demonic sects were rampant, and the entire righteous sect was in a precarious situation. In desperation, the 36 sects that were ranked at the top of the righteous sects jointly begged the supporting Immortal Island to save the situation. In response to the request, Fuxian Island's cultivation pavilion sent 80 tribulation-passing elders and 3,000 nascent soul cultivators to attack decisively. They turned the situation around in one fell swoop, and finally they had a peak battle with the #1 demonic sect, the 10,000 demons. At the cost of more than 60 tribulation-passing elders and 2,000 nascent soul cultivators, they repelled the 10,000 demons. The tragic degree of that battle was unbearable for those who were still alive today. Since then, the vitality of the entire cultivation world was greatly damaged, and there was more than 400 years of peace between the righteous and the devil sections. And because of that battle, no one dared to challenge the prestige of Fuxian Island's cultivation pavilion. The matter of Yu Qianzhou breaking through to the foundation establishment stage had already been reported to the sect. The next day he received a registration notice, so he went to the Penglai Pavilion, alone to register. As a result, he was asked to go to the Cultivation Pavilion, to verify his name, and then return to the Penglai Pavilion to report. After that he was officially recognized as a foundation establishment stage disciple of Fuxian Island. Yu Qianzhou didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Not only did this Penglai Pavilion look like a government office building in his previous life, but even the procedures were so similar. Yu Qianzhou had naturally heard of the Cultivation Pavilion. In his words, the status of the Cultivation Pavilion in Fuxian Island was like the Arhat Hall of the Shaolin Temple in his previous life. When there was a problem that needed to be solved by force, the martial monks of the Arhat Hall would come out to fight. Usually, if you stood at the highest point of the Alchemy Pavilion and looked east, you would find that most of the Fuxian Island in the east was shrouded in clouds, making it hard to see through. That was the location of the Cultivation Pavilion. The place was too big, so Yu Qianzhou didn't feel ashamed to ask a few people along the way. Only after asking did he find the right way to enter. There was a valley in the middle of the two mountains. At the entrance of the valley stood a large memorial arch looking at the three big words, Cultivation Pavilion. On the memorial arch in front of him, he really felt pressured. There was no other way. Who told him to succeed late and not make it in time, so he could only come alone. Under the memorial arch stood two disciples with swords on their backs. When they saw him come alone, they stared at him coldly. Yu Qianzhou smiled and walked in front of one of them. He took out a letter of introduction and a jade disc and handed it over respectfully. Foundation Establishment Stage Disciple Yu Qianzhou, here to verify my name. The person looked at him suspiciously, took the jade disc and checked it with his divine sense. After confirming it, he said, "Follow me." Chapter 90. Correcting one's name is very simple and doesn't mean anything else. A sect that has existed for many years will always have its own management system. Disciples who have successfully advanced to the transcending tribulation stage must come to the Cultivation Pavilion to correct their name. They can't just say they are at the transcending tribulation stage. Also, some people practice strange spells that can completely conceal their cultivation, so they need to be verified. The process is very simple. After you prove your cultivation, the Cultivation Pavilion will award you a sword. Then you will bring the sword back to the Penglai Pavilion to be recorded. This will give you a proper confirmation. The two of them walked to the end of the valley. In front of them was a vast white fog. The guard disciple shot a white light into the fog, and the white fog automatically made a path. This white fog should be a formation. Yu Qianzhou saw a similar formation in the 100 Flowers Valley. After passing through the white fog, a new Fuxian Island appeared in front of Yu Qianzhou. From time to time, there would be people flying up and down on their swords in the vast wilderness. Clearly, there were many disciples cultivating. There were also people using sword arts to fight on their swords. They were fighting to their heart's content. The flowing light that flew through the sky and tunneled through the earth dazzled Yu Qianzhou. The two of them walked in the direction of the Cultivation Pavilion's main hall behind the plaza. Yu Qianzhou looked around at the figures flying on their swords. Just as his mind was in turmoil, a white light suddenly whizzed toward the two of them. Yu Qianzhou was greatly alarmed, only to see the disciple guarding the gate in front pointing with his finger and shouting, "Go." The long sword on his back shot out with a chong sound, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a stream of light that shot towards the white light. Dang! The two lights collided with each other. The gatekeeping disciple pointed his finger at his back, and the long sword that returned to its sheath automatically. The white light flew to a tree in the distance and disappeared. There was clearly a person standing at the top of the tree. The disciple who was guarding the door waved his hand as a greeting and continued to walk forward without saying a word. Yu Qianzhou, who was following behind, was very envious. This was the cultivation world in his mind. The The guard disciple led him to the Cultivation Pavilion's main hall. After seeing an elder with the surname Quan, he handed the jade plate to him and left. After Elder Quan checked the jade disc in his hand, he looked at Yu Qianqiu with a slightly surprised expression. Clearly, he couldn't see through Yu Qianqiu's cultivation. Elder Quan didn't say anything and brought Yu Qianqiu to a spacious and empty room. There wasn't anything else in the room, not even a place to sit. There was only a large bell hanging in the middle of the room. Elder Quan shot a spell at the bell and said, "Yu Qianqiu, use all your cultivation to strike this bell with your bare hands." This was probably a magic tool to verify cultivation. Yu Qianqiu bowed respectfully and said, "Yes." He walked in front of the hanging bell and silently channeled his true essence from his dantian. He circulated it to the limit and fiercely struck it with his palm. Dong! The deep and long bell rang. Yu Qianqiu didn't feel anything special. Suddenly there was a light sound above his head. He looked up and saw a long sword falling towards him. He subconsciously reached out and caught it. Yu Qianqiu held the sword and looked suspiciously at Elder Quan. The latter twirled his beard with his fingers and nodded. "That's right, Yu Qianqiu. Your cultivation level has already reached the early stage of the foundation building realm. I'll give you a proper name. The sword in your hand is the proof." As he said this, he shouted towards the door, "Jiqing." An expressionless middle-aged man quietly walked in and bowed. "Elder Quan." Elder Quan handed the jade plate to him and waved his hand. "Early stage foundation establishment. Take him away." "Yes." The middle-aged man then said to Yu Qianqiu, "Follow me." With that he left. Yu Qianqiu bowed towards Elder Quan. "Thank you, Elder Quan." Seeing him nod, he turned and followed the middle-aged man. When they arrived at a room, the middle-aged man opened a box and placed the jade plate in his hand inside. He then opened another box and took out another jade plate. He handed it to Yu Qianqiu and said, "Insert your true essence." After Yu Qianqiu did as he was told, the middle-aged man struck the jade plate in his hand and said coldly, "Take good care of the jade plate. In the future you can use it to freely enter and exit the Cultivation Pavilion's territory." "Yes." Yu Qianqiu saw that the middle-aged man's cold face was like a dog that didn't eat shit, so he couldn't be bothered to talk to him. Looking at the jade plate in his hand, he thought about the 100 Flowers Valley's 100 Flowers token. Wasn't it similar to this jade plate? The two were probably related, which could be seen from the fact that the palace mistress of 100 Flowers Palace and the previous sect master of Fuxian Island were father and daughter. Then the middle-aged man didn't care whether Yu Qianqiu remembered it or not. He expressionlessly explained the rules in one breath and told him that he could go back. Yu Qianqiu thought about what he said and reluctantly bowed before leaving the room. It turned out that there were two other pavilions in the Cultivation Pavilion's territory, which occupied nearly half of Fuxian Island's territory. They were the Heavenly Heart Pavilion and the Sutra Depository, which were protected by the Cultivation Pavilion. When talking about the Heavenly Heart Pavilion, the middle-aged man sternly warned him not to go near it. The elders of Fuxian Island who lived there were late-stage tribulation passing experts. Otherwise he couldn't complain if something happened. As for the Sutra Depository, it was protected by the Cultivation Pavilion because it contained all the spells and precious ancient books of Fuxian Island. The disciples of Fuxian Island who were not part of the Cultivation Pavilion were given the jade plates so that they could pass through the pavilion's protective array and enter the Sutra Depository to study. Yu Qianqiu's heart palpitated with eagerness. Right now he only had cultivation, but what he lacked was cultivation techniques. After leaving the main hall, he really wanted to go to the Sutra Depository to take a look. However, he still had to return to Penglai Pavilion to report, so he wasn't in a hurry. He looked around at the figures flying around. He walked past the square and came to the sea of fog at the entrance. He took out the jade plate and injected his primordial essence into it. A white light shot into the sea of fog and the fog rolled to make a path. He smoothly passed through the fog and returned to the valley. When he passed by the gate, he saw the two disciples guarding the gate. He cupped his hands and bowed before leaving the Cultivation Pavilion. After he came out, he pulled out the long sword in his hand. The sword was like a pool of autumn water. It was so bright that one could see one's reflection. The sword and the handle were engraved with the words Fuxian Island. When he was in Ongquang Tsung, his master and Wu Baoru each gave him a sword. This was the third sword. After he got his title, he had one less worry and was in the mood to look at the scenery around him. When he arrived at Penglai Pavilion, he saw an acquaintance that he hadn't seen for a long time. It was Qing Gingqing who brought him to Fuxian Island. He waved his hand and shouted, "Martial Uncle Qing." Qing Gingqing was slightly startled. When he saw who it was, he smiled and said, "So it's you, Qianqiu." He glanced at the long sword in Yu Qianqiu's hand and said, "Congratulations on successfully building your foundation." The scene of him being surrounded by dozens of elders in the past appeared in front of him. Yu Qianqiu smiled and asked, "Martial Uncle Qing, why are you here?" "I'm just an external affairs disciple. What business can I have? I still have to run between Fuxian Island and the Hundred Flowers Valley." Qing Gingqing shook his head. The two of them chatted for a long time. In the end, Qing Gingqing had something to do and had to leave. Yu Qianqiu remembered that he had promised Ling Feng and the others that he would give each of them a storage bag. So he said, "Martial Uncle Qing, take care. Yu Qianqiu still has a favor to ask of you." Qing Gingqing said straightforwardly, "Say it. What is it?" After Yu Qianqiu calculated in his heart, he said, "I need Martial Uncle Qing to help me buy 5 storage bags from the Hundred Flowers Valley. Is that convenient?" "You mean buy 5 storage bags?" Qing Gingqing looked at him with a bit of difficulty. It wasn't that he didn't want to help, but 5 storage bags wasn't a small amount of money. A storage bag with the capacity of 1 room would cost 1 high-grade spirit stone. These 5 storage bags would cost at least 5 high-grade spirit stones. Yu Qianqiu had just reached foundation establishment. How much money could he have? He didn't have that much money to pay for it. Yu Qianqiu seemed to see through his thoughts. He took out 10 high-grade spirit stones from the storage bag and handed them to him. "Buy me 5 storage bags with the capacity of 1 room." Qing Gingqing looked at the spirit stones in his hand and was stunned. He didn't expect Yu Qianqiu to have so many spirit stones. He quickly said, "It's too much. I only need 5 high-grade spirit stones." He was about to return 5. Yu Qianqiu blocked it with his hand and said with a smile, "I am indebted to Martial Uncle for thinking so highly of me. These spirit stones can be considered as money for Martial Uncle's wine. Just take it. In the future, there will inevitably be times when I need Martial Uncle's help. I hope Martial Uncle won't refuse." Qing Gingqing pointed at Yu Qianqiu and said with a smile, you are. Forget it, I'm too lazy to talk to you. Just take it as I've accepted your bribe. After I buy the things, I'll go straight to the Alchemy Pavilion to find you. Just take it as taking the money to run errands." He put away the spirit stones. Yu Qianqiu chuckled. It was no wonder that this uncle master was someone who spent a lot of time outside. He saw through Yu Qianqiu's scheme of using money to win people's hearts. However, this person was truly worth befriending. Just based on the fact that Yu Qianqiu was at the completion level and didn't put on airs like others, Yu Qianqiu was certain. The two of them smiled and parted ways, going about their own business. Chapter 91. After settling the matter, he walked towards the direction of the Alchemy Pavilion. Along the way, he occasionally encountered disciples who hadn't reached the foundation building realm. When they saw him carrying a sword on his back, they all saluted him. Felt really good. When he returned to the top of the Alchemy Pavilion, the story between him and Yan Shu had already spread like wildfire in the Alchemy Pavilion. Many people recognized him. When the disciples who hadn't reached the foundation building realm saw him carrying a sword on his back, they all called him Martial Uncle. Yu Qianqiu smiled and nodded at them one by one. He thought to himself, it seems like Yan Shu really isn't popular. Speak of the devil and you'll see him. Yan Shu was standing at the entrance of the main hall. When he saw him carrying a sword on his back, his expression was uncertain. Yu Qianqiu originally wanted to pretend he didn't see him and directly return to his courtyard, but he remembered that his master said he could enter the main hall whenever he wanted. He also wanted to see what the Alchemy Pavilion's main hall looked like, so he walked towards Yan Shu and waved at him from afar. Martial Uncle Yan. It was said that when these two met there would be a good show to watch. Many disciples looked in their direction, waiting for something to happen. Yan Shu indifferently replied with a "N." Yu Qianqiu asked, "Is my master inside?" "Elder Guan is concocting pills. It's best if you don't disturb him," Yan Shu said. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and said, "I won't." I'm just going to see him. After saying that, he didn't care whether Yanshu agreed or not and walked inside. Yanshu's cheeks twitched. He gritted his teeth in anger, but there was nothing he could do. He could enter and leave the main hall whenever he wanted because Elder Guan personally said so. Originally, it was a good thing that Yu Qianzhou returned to the Alchemy Pavilion. If he was given a dangerous job to do, he would be killed sooner or later. Who knew that Elder Guan, who usually didn't care about such things, would personally make arrangements for him? Yanshu had no choice but to wait for the right opportunity. The disciples outside the palace did not see what they had imagined, and they were all a little disappointed. The main hall of the Alchemy Pavilion was quite spacious, but unfortunately there were not many people around. There were 2 underground entrances on both sides of the main hall. Yu Qianzhou chose an entrance and walked down. Not long after, he could feel the temperature rising. As he walked further, a huge underground space appeared in front of him. The ground was excavated flat and everyone seemed to be very busy. There were many caves around it and a faint red light could be seen coming out of them. Clearly, like the secret room by the sea, this was a place for alchemy. I wonder which secret chamber is Master in. Yu Qianzhou picked a disciple who hadn't reached the foundation building realm and asked him about it. After that disciple bowed and told him where Guan Weiwu was, Yu Qianzhou patted his shoulder and let him go. Felt good to be a teacher. Walking towards the largest pill room, he saw Guan Weiwu, who was completely focused on refining pills. Master. Yu Qianzhou bowed. Guan Weiwu turned his head and smiled. Why are you here? Yu Qianzhou's face was full of sincerity. I haven't seen Master for a day and I miss you, so I came to see Master. Guan Weiwu stroked his messy beard with satisfaction and said with a smile, Master is currently refining a pill that can recover one's yuan qi. Go play on the side first, I'll talk to you later. After saying that, he once again focused his attention on the pill furnace. Oh. Yu Qianzhou nodded obediently, but he was a little depressed. His disciple came all the way here to flatter him, but he told him to go play on the side. That was too rude. What he didn't know was that Guan Weiwu treated him very well. If it was someone else who came to disturb him at this time, he would have already chased them away. Yu Qianzhou looked around the alchemy room. Apart from being a little big, there was nothing special about it. There was a large pile of spirit herbs in the corner. There were really a lot of them. As expected of the treatment of the Alchemy Pavilion's principal elder. He had stayed in the 10,000 fragrance garden for a long time, so he was no stranger to spirit herbs. Looking around, he felt bored. He wanted to go back but was afraid it would be rude. He wanted to greet his master but was afraid that his master would be unhappy. He could only stand on the side and stare blankly at the pill furnace. Bang! The sound awakened Yu Qianzhou, who was in a daze. The fragrance of pills filled the air, and a group of shadows jumped out from the top of the furnace. Guan Weiwu raised his palm and sucked in all the pills. He held them in his hand and examined them. He shook his head and sighed. Yu Qianzhou was also a person with some experience in alchemy. He couldn't help but walk over to see what kind of pills his master was refining. Guan Weiwu counted the 20 pills in his hands. 13 of them were white and sparkling, looking very beautiful, while the other 7 were black, burnt and ugly. Yu Qianzhou felt that it was strange. How could a furnace of pills produce 2 different colors? He had never encountered such a thing when he was refining the building foundation pills. He couldn't help but ask, Master, what kind of pill are you refining? Guan Weiwu looked at Yu Qianzhou and was slightly stunned. He was the disciple of a dignified Alchemy Pavilion elder, but he didn't even know what kind of pill it was. It was really embarrassing. It was all his fault. He had never taught his disciple anything before, so he felt ashamed. He said pleasantly, It's a qi-returning pill for cultivators above the building foundation stage to recover their vitality. From this month onwards, you will also be given 1 qi-returning pill every month. Damn it, I only get 1 every month, what kind of vitality can I recover? Yu Qianzhou wasn't interested in it. He pointed at the pill in his hand and asked, Master, then why are there black and white pills in this pill? Guan Weiwu shook his head and sighed. The white ones are completed pills and the black ones are wasted pills. After refining the qi-returning pill for so many years, it's a pity that the success rate can't be increased. The rate of wasted pills is too high. A furnace of 20 pills will inevitably have 6 or 7 wasted pills. In the entire Fuxian Island, only the qi-returning pill is used in large quantities. Such a high rate of wasted pills makes one's heart ache. With that said, he removed the wasted pills in his hand and kept the completed pills. He went to the corner of the alchemy room and picked up a few spiritual herbs. He put them into the furnace and continued the trial. Qi-returning pill? Yu Qianchou, who was standing at the side, vaguely felt that he had seen this name somewhere before. It seemed like other than the pill recipe jade disc, it was impossible to see it anywhere else. Anyway, when Guan Weiwu was refining pills, he wouldn't pay attention to him. Yu Qianchou reached into his storage bag and grabbed the pill recipe jade disc. He injected his divine sense to check. He had only seen the pill recipe on the 3rd level of the jade disc. It should be in here. His divine sense entered the 3rd level and checked through the many pill recipes. As expected, he found the name Qi-returning pill. After memorizing the name and appearance of the spiritual herbs and the refining method, he withdrew his divine sense. Thinking back to the spiritual herbs that his master had just grabbed, they were no different from the ones in his mind. How could it be a wasted pill? Could it be that his master's refining method was wrong? He was an old hand at refining pills. It shouldn't be possible, right? In his experience of refining pills, he didn't have the concept of a wasted pill because he had never encountered one. Thinking of this, he had an urge to refine a furnace. If he could successfully refine it, it meant that there was indeed a problem with his master's refining method. At the same time, it also meant that the refining method on the pill recipe jade disc was indeed extraordinary. Even an alchemy fanatic could be compared to it. What kind of concept was that? Yu Qianchou was vaguely excited. He couldn't wait to give it a try. Unfortunately, there was no place for him to refine pills. Later, I'll ask my master to take a look. Seeing that Guan Weiwu still needed some time to refine the pills, he walked to the corner of the alchemy room and picked up a set of spiritual herbs for refining qi-returning pills. Thinking about how he had failed many times when refining the building foundation pill, it was better to prepare a few more sets. He picked up another 3 sets, making a total of 4 sets and placed them on the ground. Then he quietly stood to the side. When his master's furnace of pills was ready, he would open his mouth and ask for a place to refine pills. Chapter 92. Yu Qianchou felt a little drowsy as he smelled the aroma of the various spirit herbs in the pill room. Just as he yawned, he heard a ping sound as the lid of the pill furnace opened. A fragrant aroma assailed his nostrils. Yu Qianchou wiped his face and woke up. He saw that Master Guan Weiwu had already collected the pills. "Master, how is it?" Yu Qianchou walked over and asked. Guan Weiwu looked at the 20 black and white pills in his hand and frowned. He shook his head and said, "I changed the method, but it still doesn't work. This time there are actually 8 waste pills." He then removed the black waste pills in his hand. Yu Qianchou scratched his head and said, "Master, I have a favor to ask of you." Guan Weiwu put the finished pills into his storage bag and asked, "What is it?" Yu Qianchou ran over and picked up the 4 sets of spirit herbs on the ground. He laughed and said, "Master's every move reflects the style of a grandmaster. Disciple's heart is itching and I am very envious. I also want to try it out. Master, can you give Disciple a pill room and let Disciple try and see what it's like to concoct pills?" Guan Weiwu, who had just concocted a batch of pills, was unhappy because the results were not good. But when he heard his disciple say that he had the style of a grandmaster, he couldn't help but stroke his beard. In the entire cultivation world, who didn't know the name pill addict, Guan Weiwu? If he claimed to be second in alchemy skills, who would dare claim to be first? He didn't think that even his disciple who didn't know alchemy could see that he had the style of a grandmaster. But what he said was the truth. This disciple of his was an honest and reliable person. Guan Weiwu looked at Yu Qianchou with more and more admiration. Yu Qianchou carefully smiled. He didn't know that his casual words of flattery made his master feel so good. He was just flattering him out of habit. "You also want to concoct pills?" Guan Weiwu stared at the 4 sets of spirit grass in his hands. They were clearly the spirit grass needed to refine the qi-returning pill. Guan Weiwu thought to himself, "This disciple of mine really has a bit of talent in alchemy." He only took a glance at the prescription I picked up and he actually remembered it. That's right, Master is the head elder of the Alchemy Pavilion. His alchemy skills are unparalleled in this world. As a disciple with such a good opportunity to learn, how could I let it go? Even if I'm stupid, I still have to give it a try. In the future, when people find out that I'm your direct disciple, if they ask, I can at least say that I've refined pills before. I can't possibly say that my master is the head elder of the Alchemy Pavilion and that I haven't even touched a furnace before. Master, do you think I'm right? Yu Qianzhou said sincerely. Yes. Guan Weiwu nodded. If word got out that the pill addict's direct disciple didn't know how to refine pills, it would be a joke. He would definitely lose face. Furthermore, the spirit herbs used to refine the qi-returning pill weren't very precious spirit herbs. If he tried it out, he might be able to learn something. Alright. Take these 4 sets of spirit herbs to broaden your horizons and experience the refining process of the spirit herbs in the furnace. If it's not enough, come to me for more. When I'm free, I'll teach you a few alchemy techniques. After Guan Weiwu finished speaking, he shouted towards the outside, Yang Qian. When you're free. Once you see a furnace, you can't even walk. Who knows when you'll be free? Yu Qianzhou smiled in his heart and said respectfully, Thank you, Master, for fulfilling my wish. After a while, an old man hurriedly ran in and bowed. Elder Guan, what can I do for you? This person was the manager of the Alchemy Pavilion. His cultivation had reached the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. Yu Qianzhou had heard of his name before, so he immediately bowed and said, Manager Yang. He addressed Yang Qianzhou this way to avoid conflict with the rules of Fuxian Island. According to the rules, he had to address Yang Qianzhou as Grand Master, but in front of his master, it was naturally inconvenient to do so. In fact, when other people encountered such a situation, they would also do the same. Guan Weiwu pointed at Yu Qianzhou and said, This is my disciple Yu Qianzhou, arrange an alchemy pavilion for him. Understood, Elder Guan. Yang Qian smiled at Yu Qianzhou and said, Come with me. Guan Weiwu also waved his hand at him and said, Go. Go. Be more attentive. Yu Qianzhou thanked Guan Weiwu and left with Yang Qian with the spirit herbs. Outside, Yang Qian looked at Yu Qianzhou. Guan Weiwu had accepted more than 10 disciples, but in the end some died and some joined other masters. The reason was naturally because after Guan Weiwu excitedly accepted disciples, he did not care about them anymore. Some disciples even met their master for the first time and did not see him a second time. This Yu Qianzhou was regarded so highly by Guan Weiwu, it was really unusual. Yang Qian hesitated for a while, then led Yu Qianzhou to an empty alchemy pavilion and asked the latter, Yu Qianzhou, what do you think of this place? If you don't like it, we can change to another one. Yu Qianzhou looked inside. As long as it could be used for alchemy, there was no need to care about so many things. He bowed and said, Thank you, Grandmaster Yang, this one will do. There is no need to trouble yourself. That's good, call me if there is anything. I still have something to do. I will leave first. Yang Qian smiled and said. Yu Qianzhou sent him out. Returning to the alchemy pavilion, he stepped on a protruding stone on the ground. There was a sound under the alchemy furnace and a red light overflowed. The room instantly lit up and the temperature gradually rose. The earth fire burned the alchemy furnace. Yu Qianzhou took out a portion of the spirit herbs and threw the remaining 3 portions into his storage bag. After the alchemy furnace finished preheating, he opened the lid and threw the spirit herbs inside, then quickly closed it. His divine sense guided the airflow and quickly refined the spirit herbs. With this test, Yu Qianzhou was pleasantly surprised to find that his divine sense's control over the airflow was 1,000 times easier. Compared to refining foundation building pills, he had to use spirit stones to restore his divine sense. No wonder it was said that alchemy was only suitable after the foundation building stage. The difference was simply too big. Different alchemy furnaces had differences in alchemy, and it had little to do with whether he was used to it or not. This alchemy furnace was obviously much worse than the one Majugu used. The heat inside was not evenly distributed and it was very easy for it to suddenly go berserk. Fortunately, he had honed it in pain, so he was very skilled in using his divine sense to control the airflow. No matter how violent the airflow was or how difficult it was to control, his divine sense would guide, block or draw a small circle, and it would effortlessly tame the hot airflow. Whatever he wanted it to do, it would obediently listen. This was the first time Yu Qianzhou enjoyed the feeling of controlling the air to his heart's content. That kind of smooth and comfortable feeling was too refreshing and he was proud of himself. Little guy, you want to fight with me? According to the method of refining the chi returning pill in his mind, the several spirit herb essences separated or combined, smoothly circulating inside the alchemy furnace, drawing beautiful arcs. Sometimes it was fast, sometimes it was slow, sometimes it was dancing inside the furnace, and sometimes it was separated and combined. The beauty of this movement and stillness made even Yu Qianzhou himself intoxicated. Inside the furnace, there was a light blue crystal clear, and the largest spirit herb essence slowly floated in the center. Around it, there were several crystal clear balls of other colors circling around it. A gust of air blew past and the crystal clear balls became bigger and bigger. Yu Qianzhou's divine sense moved, combine. The flying crystal clear balls suddenly became like meteorites hitting the earth, and one by one they collided with the crystal blue ball in the center. In an instant, there was only a ball of crystal clear balls of multicolored light left inside the furnace. Yu Qianzhou's divine sense moved again, separate. Under the control of the airflow, the multicolored crystal in the center of the furnace threw out drops of water like a spinning umbrella. As a result, it disappeared without a trace, but it formed 20 much smaller multicolored crystal clear balls in the furnace. Under the control of the airflow, they rotated in the center in an orderly manner, receiving the baptism of the highest temperature in the furnace. Yu Qianzhou let out a sigh of relief. This was the first time he used his divine sense to control more than 20 crystals at the same time. However, after his cultivation reached the foundation establishment stage, it was obvious that he had been worried for nothing. Checking the movement inside the furnace, he felt that there shouldn't be any more problems. Chapter 93. After a long time, the spiritual herb essence that had been divided into more than 20 balls shrunk into white pills the size of quail eggs. Done. Yu Qianzhou slapped open the lid of the furnace, and the pills inside were quickly ejected by the hot air. Yu Qianzhou quickly bounced up and opened up his shirt to grab all the pills. He didn't have a cultivation like Guan Weiwu who could suck them all out with a wave of his hand. After landing, Yu Qianzhou counted carefully. There were 20 pills, not one less, and there were no black pills like the ones his master had refined. However, the color seemed different from the ones his master had refined. He picked one up and took a closer look. It was fragrant, sparkling white, smooth and glossy. There was a layer of white light on it, and it seemed to look better than the ones his master had refined. That wasn't right. With his beginner's skills, how could he refine it better than his master? Could it be that it looked good but the medicinal effects were much worse? Yu Qianzhou suddenly thought of the foundation establishment pills he had refined. Qin Feng had used 2 to successfully build his foundation, and Guan Yu had used 7. Guan Yu had also used 3 on supporting Immortal Island, so that was 10 in total. Yu Qianzhou was even more exaggerated, using 12. Could it be that this had nothing to do with the medicinal effects? No way. He had to take it to his master. Maybe his master would know what the problem was. Yu Qianzhou lifted the hem of his shirt and walked to the largest pill room in the center, puzzled. When he entered, Guan Weiwu was holding the pills in his hand, shaking his head and sighing. Clearly, he had refined another batch of pills that didn't go his way. Master! Yu Qianzhou called out. Guan Weiwu didn't even raise his head and said, "Are there not enough spiritual herbs? Go and get them yourself." "Oh, master. I refined a batch of chi recovery pills. I don't know how it turned out, so I brought it here for you to take a look," Yu Qianzhou said embarrassedly. Guan Weiwu raised his head in surprise and said, "You refined a batch of chi recovery pills? So fast? Let me have a look." He didn't believe it. He didn't know anything. How could he concoct pills for the first time? Yu Qianzhou lifted the hem of his robe and spread it out. There were 20 pearls lying quietly in his robe, waiting for someone to pick them. Guan Weiwu first glanced at it. With his experience, he could naturally tell the quality of the pill at a glance. Then he widened his eyes in disbelief. Damn it. Sure enough, there was a problem with my refinement, but it shouldn't have shocked you to this extent. If you have something to say, just say it. I will humbly accept it. Yu Qianzhou smiled unnaturally and said, "Master, what's the problem?" This disciple is puzzled and hopes that Master can correct me. Guan Weiwu's hands trembled as he reached out and pinched one out. He looked at it over and over again, then placed it in front of his nose and sniffed it. Finally, he said with a serious expression, "Did you really make this yourself?" "I used a few sets of spirit herbs to refine it." Xianxia was stunned. "Damn it. Don't tell me you're afraid that I'll waste more spirit herbs. If I say I used one set, you might ask me to bring back the extra." "Damn it. Don't be too stingy as a master. I'm even more stingy than you. How can it be so easy to take back something that's in my hands?" Xianxia said with a little embarrassment. "Look at what you're saying. Naturally, this disciple made it myself. This disciple can fool anyone, but I wouldn't dare to fool master. That used 4 sets of spirit herbs to barely make 1 furnace." Hearing that he used 4 sets, Guan Weiwu revealed an expression as if he had expected it. He grabbed all the qi-returning pills that Xianxia had refined and put them into his own storage bag. He turned to the corner and picked out a few more sets of spirit herbs for refining qi-returning pills. He said to Xianxia, "Let's go. Bring me to the place where you were refining pills." Seeing that his master was not going to pursue the matter of using too many spirit herbs, but was going to personally instruct him, Guan Weiwu nodded excitedly and led the way. As soon as the 2 of them walked out, they immediately attracted a lot of attention. Those who passed by saluted and said, "Elder Guan." Guan Weiwu's mind was preoccupied with other things, so he didn't pay attention to anyone. He only knew how to follow his disciple. Yang Qian, who was in the middle of directing people, saw this. He didn't know what was going on. Could it be that there was a problem with the place that he had arranged for Xianxia? He hurriedly followed to check. Xianxia pointed to the alchemy room and said, "Master, this is the room." Guan Weiwu nodded and said, "Let's go in and have a look." Yang Qian, who followed, thought that there really was a problem with the alchemy room. But there shouldn't be a problem. It had been used for thousands of years and no one had ever said that there was a problem. How could there be a problem when Elder Guan's disciple came? Thinking about Guan Weiwu's domineering attitude when it came to alchemy, if anyone dared to make a mistake in alchemy, they would definitely be killed by him. Otherwise, how could he have the title of pill addict? Yang Qian's heart tightened. Please don't let anything bad happen. He hurriedly followed. When Xianxia went out, the earth fire under the furnace was not turned off. When he came in, it was still the same. Guan Weiwu circled the furnace twice and carefully looked at it. He didn't see anything wrong with it, although it wasn't as good as his own furnace. He pointed to the furnace and asked, "Did you use this furnace to refine?" "Yes, master." Xianxia nodded. Yang Qian, who had followed him in, also looked at it carefully. He didn't see anything wrong. Guan Weiwu carried a pile of spiritual herbs and handed a portion to Xianxia, saying, "Refine it again according to the method just now. Put your heart into it." Xianxia was delighted. Master really wanted to personally guide him in alchemy. He hurriedly said, "Yes." He skillfully threw in the spiritual herbs, closed the furnace lid, and threw himself into the process of refining the qi-returning pill. Seeing that his disciple had already entered the state of alchemy, Guan Weiwu wanted to insert his divine sense into the furnace to see how his disciple was refining. But he was afraid of disturbing his disciple, so he didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Putting away the spiritual herbs, he took out the qi-returning pill that Xianxia had just refined and examined it in his hand. Yang Qian found it strange. What were these master and disciple doing? He walked over to Guan Weiwu wanting to ask what was going on, only to see Guan Weiwu anxiously waving his hand at him, gesturing for him to be quiet. Yang Qian was so frightened that he stood there with him, not daring to move. Xianxia had the experience of refining the qi-returning pill from the previous furnace. This time he was even more at ease with his control. He was performing a wonderful game of divine sense control inside the furnace. Unfortunately, there was no one else to see it. After a long time, Xianxia finally opened his eyes. Just as he waved his hand to open the furnace lid, he heard Guan Weiwu shout, "Come." He raised his hand and sucked in the medicinal pills that had been ejected. He compared the pile of pills he had sucked in with the original one in his hand. After looking at it, he found that it really was the same method of refining the same medicinal pills. Moreover, there were no less than 20 pills, not a single one was a waste. Xianxia stopped, walked over and asked, "Master, is there a problem?" Guan Weiwu snorted and shook his head. He stuffed all the medicinal pills in his hand into his storage bag and shouted to Xianxia and Yang Qian, You two are not allowed to disturb me while I'm refining pills. Seeing how serious he was, the two of them nodded repeatedly. Guan Weiwu rolled up his sleeves, took out some spiritual herbs, and directly threw them into the furnace to begin refining. Yu Qianzhou knew that this refining would take a lot of time. He stood to the side and quietly recovered his yuan qi and slightly damaged divine sense. He then refined 2 furnaces of pills, more or less exhausted, but compared to when he was refining the building foundation pills, he did not know how many times better. Yang Qian, who was standing to the side, was shocked. He had seen the furnace of qi returning pills that Yu Qianzhou had refined. That shape, that luster, and that indistinct pill halo. He had stayed in the alchemy pavilion for nearly 100 years, so he could naturally distinguish good pills from bad ones. There were no less than 20 pills. Not a single one was a waste pill, and there was even a pill halo that only top-grade medicinal pills had. Heavens! It was actually refined by Guan Weiwu's disciple. How was this possible? Even Guan Weiwu did not have this level. Chapter 94. Although it was just an ordinary qi replenishing pill, Yang Qian knew what it represented. There were many Foundation Establishment stage disciples on the supporting Immortal Island, so they needed a lot of qi returning pills. The 10,000 fragrance garden often didn't have enough qi returning pills and spirit herbs. Furthermore, in order to appease the quarrels between the other sects, the sect had to sell a considerable amount of qi returning pills every year. However, the proportion of waste pills was too high. More than half of the pills in a furnace were waste pills. Only an expert alchemist like Guan Weiwu could control the proportion to less than half. If he could refine a full furnace of pills like Yu Qianzhou's and it was a top-grade pill with pill halo, he could sell it for at least double the price. The benefits to the sect would be unimaginable. Yang Qian finally understood why Guan Weiwu had been so reckless just now. Peng! The lid of the cauldron popped up and Guan Weiwu opened his 5 claws, sucking all the medicinal pills into his palm. Yu Qianzhou and Yang Qian walked over to watch. In his wide palm, 7 out of the 20 pills were useless. Yu Qianzhou and Yang Qian glanced at each other. Guan Weiwu suddenly raised his head to the sky and let out a long howl, causing all the busy people in the alchemy room to look in his direction. It was hard to tell if he was happy or sad. The 20 pills in his hand, regardless of whether they were good or bad, were all crushed into powder and thrown to the side. Yang Qian understood Guan Weiwu's current mood. He had been refining pills for his entire life, yet he could not compare to his disciple who had just entered the sect. Yu Qianzhou, on the other hand, was dumbfounded. He didn't know what was wrong with his master. Wasn't it just a few wasted pills? Is it worth blaming yourself like this? You see, I didn't even refine a single batch of pills, but you're still very calm. Zai. This master was really an alchemy fanatic, rotten wood that could not be carved. Guan Weiwu grabbed Yu Qianzhou's arm and shouted, "Come with me." Finished speaking, he dragged Yu Qianzhou and ran. Faster, Xikemi. You pinched me so hard it hurts. Yu Qianzhou grimaced in pain as he ran after her. Yang Qian followed suit. The 3 of them jogged all the way to Guan Weiwu's personal alchemy room. After entering, Guan Weiwu released Yu Qianzhou's arm and said, "Yu Qianzhou, refine another furnace according to the previous method. I want to infuse my divine sense into the furnace to see how you refine. You don't need to worry about my divine sense, I won't disturb you. You just focus on refining your pills, do you understand?" Yu Qianzhou rubbed his sore arm. He was also touched by his master's attentive guidance. He thought to himself, how can I, Yu Qianzhou, be able to meet 2 masters who treat me like this? Sigh. He was so moved that tears flowed down his face. He would never forget this kindness in his life. Taking the spirit grass from Guan Weiwu, he nodded and said, "Master, I understand." Then he put in the spirit grass and began to refine again. The furnace of the alchemy pavilion's principal elder was different. The heat was uniform and strong. It was better than Ma Jiugu's furnace. Yu Qianzhou sighed in his heart. Then he noticed that there were 2 more strands of divine sense inside the furnace. One was his master's and the other one? Needless to say, there were only 3 people in the alchemy room. The remaining one was definitely Yang Qian's. Guan Weiwu also noticed the extra divine sense and glared at Yang Qian. The latter smiled awkwardly and pursed his lips at the pill furnace. The two of them closed their eyes and focused on the situation inside the pill furnace. When the two of them looked, they were shocked. They discovered that Xianxia wasn't using his divine sense to directly refine the spirit grass essence. Instead, he was controlling the heat flow inside the furnace to control the spirit grass essence. The two of them had been refining pills for many years, but they had never seen someone refine pills like this. Since ancient times, who in the cultivation world didn't use their divine sense to refine pills? The only exception was those ordinary people who claimed to be able to refine pills. In reality, what they refined was just some ointment. After taking it out and rolling it into a ball, they dried it and used it as a pill. This was completely different from refining pills. Even if they used real materials to refine pills, 90% of the world's essence would be gone. Xianxia's method was unheard of and unseen, but it was a breath of fresh air. They didn't know that Xianxia had already begun to learn alchemy when he was still in the qi refining stage. Based on his cultivation at that time, his divine sense couldn't directly control anything inside the furnace, forcing him to come up with a method to use his divine sense to stir the air flow. Although he finally succeeded in learning it, the suffering and pain he suffered during the process was something that Guan Weiwu and Yang Qian couldn't understand. They also didn't know that Xianxia was stupid enough to forcibly use his divine sense to refine pills before he reached the foundation building stage. Of course, there were objective reasons for him to do so. First, he was eager to obtain the foundation building pill. Second, he listened to Xianxia's words. She said that Ma Zhigu said that very few people could refine pills while in the qi refining stage. Since it was very few, it meant that there was, and since there was, it meant that he could also do it. In the end, relying on a large number of spirit stones, he really did it. Third, he didn't know that the so-called few people were gifted, and their cultivation was comparable to that of the foundation building stage when they were in the qi refining stage. Fourth, he didn't know that forcibly refining like that would accidentally destroy his divine sense and turn him into an idiot. If he had known this, he would probably rather be killed than bear the result of turning into an idiot. Fifth, and also more or less related to the third reason. Although he wasn't gifted when he was in Ongquang, because of the help of the golden bead, he could inflate his dantian for a very long time, which allowed him to have a larger capacity of true qi than people at the same cultivation level as him. As a result, his cultivation at the late qi refining stage was indeed much stronger than that of ordinary people. Naturally, his divine sense was also much stronger, which to a large extent prevented him from turning into an idiot. In fact, with Xianxia's current cultivation level, he could also use the method of controlling objects with his divine sense to directly refine pills. However, he found that using the method of controlling the flow of air to refine pills was more effortless. With the help of the hot air in the furnace, it was like using 4 ounces to move 1,000 caddies, which was very effortless. Moreover, when refining pills according to the inertia of the flow of air, the essence of the spiritual herbs would be divided and combined. Even if there were many pills, it would still be guaranteed that the medicinal properties of each pill would be evenly distributed. This was something that couldn't be achieved by using the method of controlling objects with his divine sense to forcibly separate them. That way, the medicinal properties contained in each pill would always be more or less different. It would definitely not be as uniform as the method Xianxia was using now. When the essence of the spiritual herbs in the furnace was manipulated by the flow of air by Xianxia's divine sense, it made a variety of smooth performances. All kinds of brilliant spiritual liquids danced in the furnace, drawing out a dazzling brilliance that shook people's hearts. The arcs drawn out were colorful and the convergence was enchanting. Sometimes it was dripping, sometimes it gathered and scattered, sometimes it bloomed like a flower, and sometimes it spun and embraced. Under the simple manipulation of the flow of air by his divine sense, the spiritual liquids in the furnace slowly evolved towards their ultimate goal. Guan Weiwu and Yang Qian's divine sense inside the furnace fluctuated in disbelief at first, but soon after they quietly enjoyed this visual feast. The faces of their bodies outside the furnace revealed intoxicated expressions. Even when the pills were completed, the two were still intoxicated. Ping! The furnace lid opened, and Xianxia used a method that was many times more clumsy than Guan Weiwu's. He jumped up and used the old method of using the hem of his long robe to cover the pills. The sound of the furnace lid opening also startled the two. The two opened their eyes and slowly exhaled a stuffy breath that they had no choice but to exhale. Xianxia lifted the hem of his robe and walked over. Scratching his head, he said, "Master, is there a big problem with the pills I've refined like this?" Guan Weiwu and Yang Qian looked at each other, shaking their heads and smiling bitterly. "AI." Guan Weiwu sighed. Looking at the 20 completed pills in front of him, he reached out and picked up an energy recovery pill from his disciple's robe. His eyes blurred as he looked at the mesmerizing halo that the pill was emitting. Suddenly he directly threw it into his mouth and swallowed it. What he had refined and what his disciple had refined were both energy recovery pills. However, after circulating his energy, the efficacy of the latter was nearly double that of the former. Chapter 95. Yang Qian walked over, picked up an energy recovery pill and did the same thing. The two of them stood in silence for a long time. Ashamed. Guan Weiwu, who had been standing silently, suddenly shook his head. Yang Qian sighed. "The light from the furnace is dancing, but I hope I don't wake up." Xianxia looked at the two of them, his expression a little gloomy. "The pills I refined made one of you feel ashamed, and the other hope you don't wake up? I've never seen such sarcasm before. I refined my own foundation building pills, but didn't I still succeed in building my foundation? Although I ate a little too much, damn it. What the hell are these two old bastards doing? Xianxia, who taught you this alchemy method?" Guan Weiwu stared at him with a deep gaze. Yang Qian also stared at him. Xianxia scratched his head. He really couldn't think of anyone to shift the blame to, so he could only answer honestly, "Disciple is ignorant. Disciple has never learned alchemy properly, so I could only try to refine it randomly. In the end I refined it like this." Guan Weiwu raised an eyebrow, asking, "Is it really a method you figured out yourself?" Xianxia smiled bitterly. "Disciple doesn't dare to lie to master. It's really a method I figured out randomly." Guan Weiwu glanced at Yang Qian, then shook his head and laughed bitterly. "To think that I boasted that my alchemy skills were unparalleled in the cultivation world, and even felt proud because people called me alchemy addict. Who would have thought that I was as short-sighted as a frog at the bottom of a well? I can't even compare to a disciple who has just started alchemy. How shameful." Was that disciple talking about me? Was it me? Xianxia asked himself again and again. No matter how stupid he was, he could still hear some clues from Guan Weiwu's words. It turned out that contrary to his initial guess, it wasn't that he didn't refine it well, but that he refined it very well. Calm down, I must calm down." Xianxia suppressed his increasingly excited emotions. Guan Weiwu closed his eyes and pondered for a while, then took out a spiritual herb and threw it into the furnace to refine. Yang Qian knew that he had just seen Xianxia's alchemy method, so he was probably testing it now. Xianxia obediently stood to the side and didn't say anything. Although he was very good at acting obediently after getting a bargain, it really wasn't convenient for him to be too frivolous at this time. He could only silently praise the pill recipe jade disc left behind by the pill ancestor. Ping! The lid of the furnace popped up, and the qi-returning pill was absorbed into Guan Weiwu's hand as soon as it came out of the furnace. Yang Qian was the first to step forward to take a look, and Xianxia also followed. 20 white pills were still warm as they lay in Guan Weiwu's hand. The 20 pills were completely white and not a single one was useless. Unfortunately, there was still a slight difference in quality between them and the pills that Xianxia had refined. When Guan Weiwu was refining, he wanted to learn from Xianxia and use his divine sense to control the airflow. Although he could also control it, he lacked his disciple's freedom. No matter how hard he tried, it was like he had seen a ghost. If he used too much strength, it would run faster than a rabbit, and if he used too little strength, it would turn a corner. He was not like Xianxia, whose spiritual sense would occasionally point to the east and occasionally point to the west. When he had nothing to do, he would draw a circle to the left and a circle to the right. Guan Weiwu was almost angered to death by the airflow. He couldn't tame it, and in the end he became a cat instead of a tiger. He also accepted his fate, and in the end he used his divine sense to forcibly control things to refine. Fortunately, Xianxia had already seen the alchemy steps clearly. With his many years of alchemy experience, he naturally mastered it effortlessly, and just like that, the alchemy was completed. Elder Guan, it's a success. Although it wasn't as good as Yu Qiancho's, Yang Qian still couldn't help but shout excitedly, because this was too important for supporting Xian Island. As long as the alchemy method of qi recovery pill was correct, it could be recommended for use in the entire alchemy pavilion. After all, not everyone could refine the highest grade alchemy pills like Yu Qiancho's. Guan Weiwu was a ready-made example, but it was enough. Guan Weiwu nodded solemnly and sighed, "What a pity. It's just the shape but not the spirit." After saying that, he stared at Yu Qiancho with sparkling eyes. Yang Qian also did the same. "Damn it. I really didn't do it on purpose. Now even Master's limelight has been overshadowed." Yu Qiancho subconsciously shrank back. Guan Weiwu took a deep breath, turned his head and said, "Yang Qian, ask the sect leader and Elder Xiangshan and Elder Puna to come quickly." "Yes." Yang Qian bowed and quickly flew out of the alchemy room. When the disciples outside saw the steward flying in the cave in a hurry, they looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. Xiangshan, Puna evil? Journey of Heroes? Laba Kanji? Island of Heroes? Supporting Xian Island? There didn't seem to be any relationship between the two islands, right? Yu Qiancho looked at Master and really wanted to ask if there was Laba Kanji on the island. Not long after, Guan Weiwu suddenly listened and nodded. "He's here, Yu Qiancho, go out and welcome the sect leader." When the two of them left the alchemy room, they saw the sect leader Feng Xiangtian leading a group of people in big strides. The surrounding disciples kept bowing and said, "Sect leader, elder." It wasn't just one or two elders, there were more than 10 of them. They hadn't seen something like this in the Alchemy Pavilion's underground alchemy room for many years. Guan Weiwu frowned and shouted, "Unrelated disciples, go do what you need to do, this has nothing to do with you." His voice reverberated throughout the underground space and the disciples who came to bow dispersed. Feng Xiangtian, who was dressed in a bright robe, stood out like a crane among chickens. He laughed from afar and said, "Weiwu, is the good news that Yang Qian told me true? I've brought all the elders here to verify it. You mustn't disappoint us." Yu Qiancho realized that his archenemy Yan Shu was also here. He was leading the way with Yang Qian in front of the sect leader and the others. When they came closer, the master and disciple were about to bow when Feng Xiangtian grabbed Guan Weiwu's wrist and said, "No need to be so polite." Then he looked around and said, "There are too many people here, let's talk inside your alchemy room." Once everyone entered, an elder placed a layer of light curtain at the door of the alchemy room, immediately blocking all the sounds outside. Naturally, the sounds inside could not be heard outside. Fortunately, Guan Weiwu's alchemy room was big enough that it was not crowded when everyone stood in it. Feng Xiangtian said to Guan Weiwu solemnly, "I heard from Yang Qian that your disciple Yu Qiancho solved the problem of the energy recovery pill, is it true?" Guan Weiwu looked at everyone and sighed, "Sect leader senior brother, it is true." "Good, good, good." Feng Xiangtian hammered his palms with his fists and said good 3 times. He pointed at Guan Weiwu and said, "Junior brother, your alchemy pavilion has made a great contribution to supporting Xian Island." Then he turned around and waved at the elders, "As long as my supporting Immortal Island has enough energy recovery pills, no matter what happens in the cultivation world, my supporting Immortal Island will have the upper hand." Feng Xiangtian's domineering aura of a superior was revealed as he talked. All the elders nodded. Everyone knew that although supporting Xian Island was isolated in the sea and would not take the initiative to cause any trouble, there was always an unpredictable storm in the sky. Who could guarantee that nothing would happen to supporting Xian Island? It was probably not only the demonic path that wanted to challenge the #1 sect in the cultivation world. Once a war broke out, supporting Xian Island would have enough energy recovery pills to maintain a strong fighting strength. With their tireless elites, it would be hard for them to continue fighting the enemy. Where is Yu Qiancho? Feng Xiangtian just realized that Yu Qiancho, who was just in front of him, was nowhere to be seen. Everyone turned around to look for him. "Disciple is here." Everyone looked towards the place where the voice came from. At the corner at the back, a hand was raised, but the person was nowhere to be seen. All the elders opened up a path. "Damn it. You bunch of old fellows are here, how can I stand in front of you?" Yu Qiancho gave everyone a simple and honest smile and jogged to the front of the sect master. Chapter 96. Feng Xiangtian looked at Yu Qianzhou with a faint smile. Speaking of which, he didn't know most of the young disciples of Fuxian Island, but this ordinary-looking Yu Qianzhou in front of him was the third time he met him. The first 2 times he met him had given him a headache, but this time he gave him a big surprise. Seeing the long sword on Yu Qianzhou's back, Feng Xiangtian frowned as if he remembered something. He looked at Guan Weiwu and asked, "Didn't Yu Qianzhou not have a foundation-building pill? How did he succeed in building his foundation?" Most of the elders didn't know about this, but when they heard the sect master's words, they all showed questioning looks. Guan Weiwu smiled bitterly and said, "I don't know what kind of dog shit luck this kid has. After staying in the mulberry grassland for a few days, he actually got Jugu's favor and personally helped him to build his foundation." As soon as he said this, everyone's doubts were immediately resolved. No one doubted Ma Jugu's ability, but they were curious about how Yu Qianzhou could get Ma Jugu's favor. After a careful examination, they found that they couldn't see through his cultivation, so Ma Jugu probably fancied his talented physique. Feng Xiangtian nodded and said, "So that's how it is." Then he changed the topic and waved his hand. "Okay, let's not talk about this. Weiwu, everyone is not here to chat, take out what everyone wants to see." Guan Weiwu nodded and took out a set of spiritual herbs from his storage bag, handing it to Yu Qianzhou and said with a smile, "Refining this qi returning pill, this master of mine is not as good as you, so don't embarrass yourself by taking it out. You can refine 1 furnace." Everyone was shocked when they heard this. Even Guan Weiwu felt inferior. How was this possible? They all looked at Yu Qianzhou in disbelief. The latter sighed inwardly, "Master, are you trying to support me or ruin me? Don't you know that a tall tree attracts the wind? Is it so easy to be in the limelight? Words spoken are like spilled water, there is no way to take them back." Yu Qianzhou could only silently accept the order. The preheating of the alchemy furnace was ready-made. He placed the spiritual herbs into the lid of the furnace and began to refine the alchemy pills. As soon as his divine sense entered the alchemy furnace to control it, he was startled. The spirit herbs swayed and almost fell to the boiling red bottom of the furnace and were destroyed. There were more than a dozen strands of divine sense around the furnace walls. Needless to say, only those old bastards in the alchemy room would dare to do this without even telling him. Feng Xiangtian's divine sense was also inside. He turned his head to look at the people around him and frowned slightly. He transmitted his voice to Yu Qianzhou. "Yu Qianzhou, don't worry about them. Focus on refining your elixir." However, he didn't think that he was doing the same thing as the others. This was probably the shamelessness of those in power. I wanted to be sneaky, but there were too many eyes." Yu Qianzhou nodded. He couldn't be bothered to care so much. He would just treat it as dog poop. Out of sight, out of mind, a bunch of old bastards. A wonderful performance began inside the furnace. The expressions on everyone's faces were surprise, disbelief, as if they were dreaming, intoxicated, and so on. Yan Shu, who was standing with Yang Qian, had a look of jealousy and hatred on his face. The two of them weren't qualified to participate in this grand event with the elders. After a ping sound, the elixir was formed. Everyone's gaze fell on the energy recovery elixir in Guan Weiwu's hand. Although it wasn't the first time Guan Weiwu had seen the elixir refined by Yu Qianzhou, he still couldn't help but reveal a stunned expression when he saw it again. He sighed with every step he took to the sect leader. Feng Xiangtian picked up one and looked at the faint white light on the energy recovery elixir. He sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "Elixir dizziness." His face was full of disbelief. Everyone came over and took one from Guan Weiwu's hand to take a look. In the blink of an eye, there were only a few elixirs left in Guan Weiwu's hand. For a moment, exclamations rang out in the pill room. After Feng Xiangtian appraised the energy recovery elixir in his hand, he swallowed it in one gulp. After a while, he exhaled and praised, "I'm afraid even the famous pill sect thousands of years ago rarely refined such a high-grade elixir." The other elders also followed suit, swallowing the energy-returning pills in their hands to fill their stomachs. Yu Qianzhou felt a toothache when he saw this. They were really freeloading. But after eating, they finally left behind a wave of praises. "Mighty, can this alchemy method be promoted in the alchemy pavilion?" Feng Xiangtian was indeed the sect leader who controlled the world's #1 sect. He was indeed outstanding in his own way. He could see the pros and cons of Yu Qianzhou's refining method with just one look. Although the elders were not proficient in alchemy, they were not completely clueless. They had never seen or heard of Yu Qianzhou's alchemy method before, so they all had the same question as the sect leader. Guan Weiwu smiled bitterly and said, "Speaking of which, it's also heaven's will. I saw that my disciple was bored, so I gave him a few sets of spiritual herbs and let him ponder on it himself. He had never refined a pill before, but who knew that by chance he would actually come up with this unprecedented alchemy method. I've also tried using this method before. Maybe it's because my talent is poor, but I'm afraid it'll be difficult for me to imitate it in a short period of time. However, this alchemy method can be promoted in the Alchemy Pavilion. I've already tried it and there have never been any cases of pills being wasted. It's just that I can't refine such a high-grade elixir." The crowd was instantly in an uproar. It was Yu Qianzhou's first time refining a pill, and even the pill addict, Guan Weiwu, had to admit that he was inferior to him. Furthermore, he even created an unprecedented alchemy method. If this wasn't talent, then what was? For a moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Yu Qianzhou, which made the latter feel very embarrassed. Feng Xiangtian said with slight regret, "This is already very good. Weiwu, you should arrange this matter as soon as possible." His gaze fell on Yu Qianzhou and he asked again, "What is your disciple doing in the Alchemy Pavilion now?" "Currently he's in charge of fetching spiritual herbs from the Myriad Fragrance Garden and the Alchemy Pavilion," Guan Weiwu replied. Feng Xiangtian was just asking casually, and he didn't expect to hear such a reply. He couldn't help but frown and his tone was a little unhappy. Since he has such talent, isn't it a bit of a waste to do such a thing? Could it be that the Alchemy Pavilion can't find a second disciple who can fetch spiritual herbs? "Mighty, it's not that I want to criticize you, but it's a good thing for you and supporting Immortal Island to have such a talented disciple by your side to inherit your legacy." Before Guan Weiwu could speak, Ferdinand, who was standing in the crowd, stood out and said anxiously, "Sect Master, Yu Qianzhou is the person whom Elder Guan and I decided on together to fetch spiritual herbs. Moreover, we just decided on him not long ago and he hasn't been there even once. How can he be changed so soon? His daughter was his flesh and blood." The words he said in a moment of panic were full of loopholes, and the reason was too far-fetched. All the elders looked at him as if they were looking at a monster. Feng Xiangtian looked at him from head to toe and he said strangely, "Elder Fei, the Alchemy Pavilion is assigning a disciple. Why are you so anxious? Could it be that changing someone to fetch spiritual herbs from your Myriad Fragrance Garden will reduce your production of spiritual herbs? Or is there any other reason? Give me a reason that can convince me." Ferdinand's face twitched. He did say something wrong because of his daughter's anxiousness. Even if he didn't say anything wrong, how could he say the real reason? He could only change his words and said, "I'm just saying, I don't mean anything else." After saying that, he retreated. Feng Xiangtian glared at him and didn't say anything, but there was a doubt in his heart. Guan Weiwu was reprimanded by the sect master, but not only was he not angry after hearing Ferdinand's words, he was secretly happy. When Ferdinand found him that day in order to fight for the position of delivering spiritual herbs for Yu Qianzhou, he even used the amount of spiritual herbs to threaten him. It was really infuriating. Now that he met someone who was harder to deal with, he lost his temper. "Yan Shu, arrange for a new disciple to deliver the spirit herbs. Yang Qian, find a room for Yu Qianzhou to use alone." Guan Weiwu quickly implemented the sect master's suggestion. At this time, Feng Xiangtian glanced at everyone and said, "This matter is of great importance. Today's matter must not be leaked to the outside world. Otherwise, you will be severely punished no matter who you are. In addition, my Fuxian Island has always been clear about rewards and punishments for the disciples. Meritorious service will be rewarded and mistakes will be punished. Yu Qianzhou has made a great contribution, so he should be rewarded. Elder Hai, you are in charge of rewards and punishments. What should we reward?" Chapter 97. After Yan Shu led the sect leader and the others away, Guan Weiwu and Yang Qian quickly summoned the nascent soul stage cultivators of the Alchemy Pavilion to plan on refining the Qi recovery pill. As for those below the nascent soul stage, they were not included. Yu Qianzhou did not want to join in the fun anymore. His storage bag contained the 1,000 upper-grade spirit stones that Elder Hai had awarded to him in front of everyone. He went to the pill room for his own use with a happy mood. When he received the 1,000 upper-grade spirit stones that were flashing with amber light, the elder's eyes turned green. It was indeed a lot of money. He had spent more than 2,000 upper-grade spirit stones to learn alchemy some time ago. He had earned back a lot in such a short time. Touching the thick pill furnace, Yu Qianzhou was filled with emotion. No wonder in his previous life, it was said that with a skill one could travel the world. It seemed that this saying was also very useful in the cultivation world. It was worth pondering over. Not long after, Guan Weiwu and Yang Qian came together. Without saying anything, Guan Weiwu took out a jade plate and handed it to Yu Qianzhou and said, "There are 3 pill recipes inside. You can use them for the trial. If you need any spirit herbs, just ask Yang Qian." Yang Qian nodded in agreement. Yu Qianzhou laughed and agreed. After sending his master and Yang Qian away, he took the jade plate in his hand and checked it. He sneered disdainfully and threw it into his storage bag. The 3 flavors were pill recipes to increase vitality and cultivation. If it was not to verify the pill recipes on the jade plate, was it necessary for him to refine the Qi recovery pill? Since it was proven useful, did he still want to contribute to the supporting Immortal Island? No way. I was going to create the world's #1 sect to play with. If I give you all the good stuff, what will I use in the future? If I want to contribute, I will do it for myself. I don't care about a mere 1,000 upper-grade spirit stones. Thinking of Ferdinand's sad eyes before he left, Yu Qianzhou felt a little guilty. He had lived with his daughter for so long. It was not right for him to leave just like that. Find some time to see that ugly girl as much as possible. At present, the most important thing was to improve his cultivation. My sword kinesis flight. Now that he had a lot of time, it was time to focus on his cultivation. Yu Qianzhou shook his head as he looked at the busy figures in the underground alchemy room. Who were they working hard for? For whom? He absolutely could not end up like them. He swayed as he walked out of the underground space and out of the main hall. He specifically walked over to the side of the disciple who had yet to reach foundation establishment. After picking up quite a few Martial Uncle Yu, he walked down the mountain. Standing next to the alchemy pavilion, Yan Shu watched the figure go down the mountain with an uncontrollable anger on his face. He remembered what his father told him after the other elders left. That's right, Yu Qianzhou. You can't act recklessly now. He is now in the eyes of the sect leader and the elders. At least for now you can't act recklessly. There will always be a chance. Yan Shu took a deep breath, exhaled and walked to the side. On the way to the cultivation pavilion, Yu Qianzhou really wanted to find a mirror to look at himself in an ancient costume with a long sword on his back. He wanted to see if he had the demeanor of a hero. Unfortunately, he did not get what he wanted. With the jade disc he obtained when he was rectifying his name, he once again passed through the protective array of the cultivation pavilion. Looking at the figure flying in the sky in front of him, Yu Qianzhou's blood boiled. He hurried to find the sutra pavilion that he had dreamed of for a long time. There were many buildings hidden among the green mountains, but which one was the sutra pavilion? He visited many of them one by one, but they were all turned away by the guards as if they were looking at a rookie. He stopped a lot of passers-by, but they either looked at him coldly or didn't even bother to talk to him. He finally understood how heartless the cultivation world was. Yu Qianzhou clenched his teeth. For the great cause of cultivation, I'll endure it. He completely displayed the tireless spirit of a Yihong brothel fan. He leaned against a tree on the side of a path and looked around, unwilling to give up. Finally, an extraordinarily handsome young man walked over from the opposite direction. Yu Qianzhou pulled himself together. Damn it! I can't always put on a begging attitude. He raised his hand and said, "Junior apprentice brother, come here for a moment." The handsome young man stopped and looked at Yu Qianzhou. He was slightly startled. He carefully examined him but couldn't see through his cultivation. He walked over and bowed. "What business does senior apprentice brother have with me? Damn it! This person is so cheap." As expected, it's still effective. Yu Qianzhou lazily got up from the tree and said expressionlessly, "Junior apprentice brother, I want to ask you something. Where is the sutra pavilion? If it's not troublesome, can you take me there?" The young man was startled, then he laughed and shook his head. "Which branch are you from?" You don't even know where the Sutra Pavilion is. You're clearly a newcomer who just entered foundation building. I'm in the middle stage of core formation, yet you dare to pretend to be my senior apprentice brother. You've got guts. Xianxia didn't think that his casual words would be seen through. He silently scolded himself for being stupid. How could he make such a low-level mistake? However, he didn't think he was that easy to fool. Looking at the young man's appearance, he didn't look like he was in the middle stage of core formation. He said with a cold face, "Junior apprentice brother, what do you mean by that?" The handsome young man couldn't be bothered to talk nonsense with him. He pointed with 2 fingers and the sword on his back shot out with a clang. It floated in the air and glared at Xianxia. The young man smiled and said, "Nothing. Since you dare to pretend to be my senior apprentice brother, then I'd like to ask senior apprentice brother for some advice. Let's see if you, a fake senior apprentice brother, can beat my junior apprentice brother." Damn. He's serious. I'm just an early-stage foundation building cultivator who doesn't know anything. Fighting a middle-stage core formation cultivator like me, isn't that courting death? Xianxia's expression instantly changed. He laughed and said respectfully, "Martial uncle's discerning eyes are like a torch. Sure enough, this little trick of mine can't fool you. Disciple was just joking. Senior, don't be angry, don't be angry." As he spoke, he carefully guarded against the 3-feet-long sword in the air that was pointed at him. The handsome young man hesitated for a moment. He stretched out 2 fingers and clenched them into a fist again. After his sword returned to its sheath, he smiled and said, "You're quite interesting. You're just asking for directions, yet you have to play so many tricks. Which branch are you from? What's your name?" After his little trick was exposed, Xianxia replied honestly, "Disciple Xianxia. I'm from the Alchemy Pavilion." The handsome young man said, "Oh, so you're a disciple from the Alchemy Pavilion. You've just reached Foundation Establishment and want to go to the Scripture Pavilion, right?" Yes, Martial Uncle is wise. He guessed it right." Xianxia said respectfully. "We're all disciples of Fuxian Island, so I won't make things difficult for you. I'll show you the way to the Scripture Pavilion. How about this? Give me a top-grade spirit stone first and I'll tell you." The handsome young man smiled and stared at his storage bag. Xianxia's face twitched. He wanted to slap himself. Not only did he fail to trick people, he was also being blackmailed. He had to give someone a top-grade spirit stone for nothing. But the situation was stronger than him. He took out an amber spirit stone unwillingly and gave it to the young man respectfully. The young man got the spirit stone and glanced at his storage bag. He looked at the spirit stone in his hand and said, "I see that you're not willing to give me the spirit stone. If this gets out, they'll say that I'm blackmailing a junior. It's not worth tarnishing my reputation for a spirit stone. How about this? Why don't you give me another top-grade spirit stone? That way it's worth my reputation. If you're not willing, I'll return this spirit stone to you and we can fight to our heart's content. That way we'll be more comfortable. What do you think?" As he spoke, the 2 fingers on his other hand were already moving. He wanted to shoot out a sword art. The threat was very strong. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.